The Duplicity of Hargraves. By O. Henry, 1862, 1910. When Major Pendleton Talbot of Mobile, Sir, and his daughter, Miss Lydia Talbot, came to Washington to reside, they selected for a boarding place a house that stood 50 yards back from one of the quietest avenues. It was an old-fashioned brick building, with a portico upheld by tall white pillars. The yard was shaded by stately locusts and elms, and a catalpa tree in season rained its pink and white blossoms upon the grass. Rows of high box bushes lined the fence and walks. It was the Southern style, an aspect of the place that pleased the eyes of the Talbots. In this pleasant private boarding house they engaged rooms, including a study for Major Talbot, who was adding the finishing chapters to his book, Anecdotes and Reminiscences of the Alabama Army, Bench, and Bar. Major Talbot was of the old South. The present day had little interest or excellence in his eyes. His mind lived in that period before the Civil War when the Talbots owned thousands of acres of fine cotton land and the slaves to till them, when the family mansion was the scene of princely hospitality and drew its guests from the aristocracy of the South. Out of that period he had brought all its old pride and scruples of honor, an antiquated and punctilious politeness, and, you would think, its wardrobe. Such clothes were surely never made within 50 years. The Major was tall, but whenever he made that wonderful, archaic genuflection he called a bow, the corners of his frock coat swept the floor. That garment was a surprise even to Washington, which has long ago ceased to shy at the frocks and broad-brimmed hats of Southern congressmen. One of the boarders christened it a Father Hubbard, and it certainly was high in the waist and full in the skirt. But the Major, with all his queer clothes, his immense area of plaited, raveling shirt bosom, and the little black string tie with the bow always slipping on one side, both was smiled at and liked in Mrs. Vardaman's select boarding house. Some of the young department clerks would often string him, as they called it, getting him started upon the subject dearest to him, the traditions and history of his beloved Southland. During his talks, he would quote freely from the Anecdotes and Reminiscences. But they were very careful not to let him see their designs, for in spite of his 68 years, he could make the boldest of them uncomfortable under the steady regard of his piercing gray eyes. Miss Lydia was a plump, little old maid of 35, with smoothly drawn, tightly twisted hair that made her look still older. Old-fashioned, too, she was, but antebellum glory did not radiate from her as it did from the Major. She possessed a thrifty common sense, and it was she who handled the finances of the family and met all comers when there were bills to pay. The Major regarded board bills and wash bills as contemptible nuisances. They kept coming in so persistently and so often. Why, the Major wanted to know, could they not be filed and paid in a lump sum at some convenient period, say when the Anecdotes and Reminiscences had been published and paid for? Miss Lydia would calmly go on with her sewing and say, "We'll pay as we go as long as the money lasts, and then perhaps they'll have to lump it." Most of Mrs. Vardaman's boarders were away during the day, being nearly all department clerks and businessmen, but there was one of them who was about the house a great deal from morning to night. This was a young man named Henry Hopkins Hargraves. Every one in the house addressed him by his full name, who was engaged at one of the popular vaudeville theaters. Vaudeville has risen to such a respectable plane in the last few years, and Mr. Hargraves was such a modest and well-mannered person that Mrs. Vardaman could find no objection to enrolling him upon her list of boarders. At the theater Hargraves was known as an all-round dialect comedian, having a large repertoire of German, Irish, Swede, and blackface specialties. But Mr. Hargraves was ambitious and often spoke of his great desire to succeed in legitimate comedy. This young man appeared to conceive a strong fancy for Major Talbot. Whenever that gentleman would begin his Southern reminiscences or repeat some of the liveliest of the anecdotes, Hargraves could always be found, the most attentive among his listeners. For a time, the Major showed an inclination to discourage the advances of the play actor, as he privately termed him. But soon the young man's agreeable manner and indubitable appreciation of the old gentleman's stories completely won him over. It was not long before the two were like old chums. the Major set apart each afternoon to read to him the manuscript of his book. During the anecdotes, Hargraves never failed to laugh at exactly the right point. The Major was moved to declare to Miss Lydia one day that young Hargraves possessed remarkable perception and a gratifying respect for the old regime. And when it came to talking of those old days, if Major Talbot liked to talk, Mr. Hargraves was entranced to listen. Like almost all old people who talk of the past, the Major loved to linger over details. In describing the splendid, almost royal days of the old planters, he would hesitate until he had recalled the name of the Negro who held his horse, or the exact date of certain minor happenings, or the number of bales of cotton raised in such a year. But Hargraves never grew impatient or lost interest. On the contrary, he would advance questions on a variety of subjects connected with the life of that time, and he never failed to extract ready replies. The fox hunts, the possum suppers, the hoedowns and jubilees in the Negro quarters, the banquets in the plantation house hall, when invitations went for 50 miles around, the occasional feuds with the neighboring gentry, the Major's duel with Rathbone Culbertson about Kitty Chalmers, who afterward married a Thwaite of South Carolina, and private yacht races for fabulous sums on Mobile Bay. The quaint beliefs, improvident habits, and loyal virtues of the old slaves, all these were subjects that held both the Major and Hargraves absorbed for hours at a time. Sometimes, at night, when the young man would be coming upstairs to his room after his turn at the theater was over, the Major would appear at the door of his study and beckon archly to him. Going in, Hargraves would find a little table set with a decanter, sugar bowl, fruit, and a big bunch of fresh green mint. "It occurred to me," the Major would begin, he was always ceremonious, "that perhaps you might have found your duties at your place of occupation sufficiently arduous to enable you, Mr. Hargraves, to appreciate what the poet might well have had in his mind when he wrote, 'Tired nature's sweet restorer, one of our southern juleps.'" It was a fascination to Hargraves to watch him make it. He took rank among artists when he began, and he never varied the process. With what delicacy he bruised the mint, with what exquisite nicety he estimated the ingredients, with what solicitous care he capped the compound with the scarlet fruit glowing against the dark green fringe. And then the hospitality and grace with which he offered it, after the selected oat straws had been plunged into its tinkling depths. After about 4 months in Washington, Miss Lydia discovered one morning that they were almost without money. The Anecdotes and Reminiscences was completed, but publishers had not jumped at the collected gems of Alabama sense and wit. The rental of a small house which they still owned in Mobile was 2 months in arrears. Their board money for the month would be due in 3 days. Miss Lydia called her father to a consultation. "No money," said he with a surprised look. "It is quite annoying to be called on so frequently for these petty sums. Really, I." The Major searched his pockets. He found only a $2 bill, which he returned to his vest pocket. "I must attend to this at once, Lydia," he said. "Kindly get me my umbrella, and I will go downtown immediately. The congressman from our district, General Fulgham, assured me some days ago that he would use his influence to get my book published at an early date. I will go to his hotel at once and see what arrangement has been made." With a sad little smile, Miss Lydia watched him button his Father Hubbard and depart, pausing at the door, as he always did, to bow profoundly. That evening at dark he returned. It seemed that Congressman Fulgham had seen the publisher, who had the Major's manuscript for reading. That person had said that if the anecdotes, etc., were carefully pruned down about 1/2, in order to eliminate the sectional and class prejudice with which the book was dyed from end to end, he might consider its publication. The Major was in a white heat of anger, but regained his equanimity, according to his code of manners, as soon as he was in Miss Lydia's presence. "We must have money," said Miss Lydia, with a little wrinkle above her nose. "Give me the $2, and I will telegraph to Uncle Ralph for some tonight." The Major drew a small envelope from his upper vest pocket and tossed it on the table. "Perhaps it was injudicious," he said mildly, "but the sum was so merely nominal that I bought tickets to the theater tonight. It's a new war drama, Lydia. I thought you would be pleased to witness its first production in Washington. I am told that the South has very fair treatment in the play. I confess I should like to see the performance myself." Miss Lydia threw up her hands in silent despair. Still, as the tickets were bought, they might as well be used. So that evening, as they sat in the theater listening to the lively overture, even Miss Lydia was minded to relegate their troubles, for the hour, to second place. The Major, in spotless linen, with his extraordinary coat showing only where it was closely buttoned, and his white hair smoothly roached, looked really fine and distinguished. The curtain went up on the first act of A Magnolia Flower, revealing a typical Southern plantation scene. Major Talbot betrayed some interest. "Oh, see," exclaimed Miss Lydia, nudging his arm and pointing to her program. The Major put on his glasses and read the line in the cast of characters that her fingers indicated. "Cal. Webster Calhoun. Mr. Hopkins Hargraves." "It's our Mr. Hargraves," said Miss Lydia. "It must be his first appearance in what he calls the legitimate. I'm so glad for him." Not until the second act did call Webster Calhoun appear upon the stage. When he made his entry, Major Talbot gave an audible sniff, glared at him, and seemed to freeze solid. Miss Lydia uttered a little ambiguous squeak and crumpled her program in her hand. For Colonel Calhoun was made up, as nearly resembling Major Talbot as one pea does another. The long, thin white hair, curly at the ends, the aristocratic beak of a nose, the crumpled, wide, raveling shirt front, the string tie, with the bow nearly under one ear, were almost exactly duplicated. And then, to clinch the imitation, he wore the twin to the Major's supposed to be unparalleled coat. High-collared, baggy, empire-waisted, ample-skirted, hanging a foot lower in front than behind, the garment could have been designed from no other pattern. From then on, the Major and Miss Lydia sat bewitched and saw the counterfeit presentment of a haughty Talbot dragged, as the Major afterward expressed it, through the slanderous mire of a corrupt stage. Mr. Hargraves had used his opportunities well. He had caught the Major's little idiosyncrasies of speech, accent, and intonation, and his pompous courtliness to perfection, exaggerating all to the purpose of the stage. When he performed that marvelous bow that the Major fondly imagined to be the pink of all salutations, the audience sent forth a sudden round of hearty applause. Miss Lydia sat immovable, not daring to glance toward her father. Sometimes her hand next to him would be laid against her cheek, as if to conceal the smile which, in spite of her disapproval, she could not entirely suppress. The culmination of Hargraves' audacious imitation took place in the third act. The scene is where Colonel Calhoun entertains a few of the neighboring planters in his den. Standing at a table in the center of the stage, with his friends grouped about him, he delivers that inimitable, rambling character monologue so famous in A Magnolia Flower, at the same time that he deftly makes juleps for the party. Major Talbot, sitting quietly but white with indignation, heard his best stories retold. His pet theories and hobbies advanced and expanded, and the dream of the anecdotes and reminiscences served, exaggerated, and garbled. His favorite narrative, that of his duel with Rathbone Culbertson, was not omitted, and it was delivered with more fire, egotism, and gusto than the Major himself put into it. The monologue concluded with a quaint, delicious, witty little lecture on the art of concocting a julep, illustrated by the act. Here Major Talbot's delicate but showy science was reproduced to a hair's breadth, from his dainty handling of the fragrant weed. The 1,000th part of a grain too much pressure, gentlemen, and you extract the bitterness, instead of the aroma of this heaven-bestowed plant, to his solicitous selection of the oaten straws. At the close of the scene, the audience raised a tumultuous roar of appreciation. The portrayal of the type was so exact, so sure and thorough, that the leading characters in the play were forgotten. After repeated calls, Hargraves came before the curtain and bowed, his rather boyish face bright and flushed with the knowledge of success. At last Miss Lydia turned and looked at the Major. His thin nostrils were working like the gills of a fish. He laid both shaking hands upon the arms of his chair to rise. "We will go, Lydia," he said chokingly. "This is an abominable desecration." Before he could rise, she pulled him back into his seat. "We will stay it out," she declared. "Do you want to advertise the copy by exhibiting the original coat, so they remained to the end. Hargraves's success must have kept him up late that night, for neither at the breakfast nor at the dinner table did he appear. About 3 in the afternoon, he tapped at the door of Major Talbot's study. The Major opened it, and Hargraves walked in with his hands full of the morning papers, too full of his triumph to notice anything unusual in the Major's demeanor. "I put it all over him last night, Major," he began exultantly. "I had my inning and I think scored. Here's what the Post says." His conception and portrayal of the old-time Southern colonel, with his absurd grandiloquence, his eccentric garb, his quaint idioms and phrases, his moth-eaten pride of family, and his really kind heart, fastidious sense of honor, and lovable simplicity, is the best delineation of a character role on the boards today. The coat worn by Colonel Calhoun is itself nothing less than an evolution of genius. Mr. Hargraves has captured his public. How does that sound, Major, for a first-nighter? "I had the honor," the Major's voice sounded ominously frigid, "of witnessing your very remarkable performance, sir, last night." Hargraves looked disconcerted. "You were there. I didn't know you ever. I didn't know you cared for the theater." "Oh, I say, Major Talbot," he exclaimed frankly, "don't you be offended. I admit I did get a lot of pointers from you that helped out wonderfully in the part. But it's a type, you know, not individual. The way the audience caught on shows that. Half the patrons of that theater are Southerners. They recognized it." "Mr. Hargraves," said the Major, who had remained standing, "you have put upon me an unpardonable insult. You have burlesqued my person, grossly betrayed my confidence, and misused my hospitality. If I thought you possessed the faintest conception of what is the sign manual of a gentleman, or what is due one, I would call you out, sir, old as I am. I will ask you to leave the room, sir." The actor appeared to be slightly bewildered, and seemed hardly to take in the full meaning of the old gentleman's words. "I am truly sorry you took offense," he said regretfully. "Up here we don't look at things just as you people do. I know men who would buy out half the house to have their personality put on the stage, so the public would recognize it." "They are not from Alabama, sir," said the Major haughtily. "Perhaps not. I have a pretty good memory, Major. Let me quote a few lines from your book. In response to a toast at a banquet given in Milledgeville, I believe, you uttered and intend to have printed these words: 'The Northern man is utterly without sentiment or warmth, except in so far as the feelings may be turned to his own commercial profit. He will suffer without resentment any imputation cast upon the honor of himself or his loved ones that does not bear with it the consequence of pecuniary loss. In his charity he gives with a liberal hand, but it must be heralded with the trumpet and chronicled in brass.' Do you think that picture is fairer than the one you saw of Colonel Calhoun last night?" "The description," said the Major, frowning, "is not without grounds. Some latitude must be allowed in public speaking." "And in public acting," replied Hargraves. "That is not the point," persisted the Major, unrelenting. "It was a personal caricature. I positively decline to overlook it, sir." "Major Talbot," said Hargraves with a winning smile, "I wish you would understand me. I want you to know that I never dreamed of insulting you. In my profession, all life belongs to me. I take what I want and what I can and return it over the footlights. Now, if you will, let's let it go at that. I came in to see you about something else. We've been pretty good friends for some months, and I'm going to take the risk of offending you again. I know you are hard up for money. Never mind how I found out. A boarding house is no place to keep such matters secret, and I want you to let me help you out of the pinch. I've been there often enough myself. I've been getting a fair salary all the season, and I've saved some money. You're welcome to a couple hundred, or even more, until you get—" "Stop," commanded the Major with his arm outstretched. "It seems that my book didn't lie, after all. You think your money salve will heal all the hurts of honor. Under no circumstances would I accept a loan from a casual acquaintance. And as to you, sir, I would starve before I would consider your insulting offer of a financial adjustment of the circumstances we have discussed. I beg to repeat my request relative to your quitting the apartment." Hargraves took his departure without another word. He also left the house the same day, moving as Mrs. Vardaman explained at the supper table, nearer the vicinity of the downtown theater, where a magnolia flower was booked for a week's run. Critical was the situation with Major Talbot and Miss Lydia. There was no one in Washington to whom the Major's scruples allowed him to apply for a loan. Miss Lydia wrote a letter to Uncle Ralph, but it was doubtful whether that relative's constricted affairs would permit him to furnish help. The Major was forced to make an apologetic address to Mrs. Vardaman regarding the delayed payment for board, referring to delinquent rentals and delayed remittances in a rather confused strain. Deliverance came from an entirely unexpected source. Late one afternoon, the door maid came up and announced an old colored man who wanted to see Major Talbot. The Major asked that he be sent up to his study. Soon an old darky appeared in the doorway, with his hat in hand, bowing and scraping with one clumsy foot. He was quite decently dressed in a baggy suit of black. His big, coarse shoes shone with a metallic luster, suggestive of stove polish. His bushy wool was gray, almost white. After middle life, it is difficult to estimate the age of a Negro. This one might have seen as many years as had Major Talbot. "I be bound you don't know me, Mars Pendleton," were his first words. The Major rose and came forward at the old, familiar style of address. It was one of the old plantation darkies, without a doubt, but they had been widely scattered, and he could not recall the voice or face. "I don't believe I do," he said kindly, "unless you will assist my memory. Don't you remember Cindy's Mose, Mars Pendleton, what migrated immediately after the war?" "Wait a moment," said the Major, rubbing his forehead with the tips of his fingers. He loved to recall everything connected with those beloved days. "Cindy's Mose," he reflected. "You worked among the horses, breaking the colts." "Yes, I remember now. After the surrender, you took the name of Don't Prompt Me Mitchell and went to the west to Nebraska." "Yassir, yassir," the old man's face stretched with a delighted grin. "Dat's him, dat's it. Nebraska. Dat's me, Mose Mitchell. Old Uncle Mose Mitchell, dey calls me now. Old Mars, your pa, gimme a pa of dem mule colts when I left, fur to stop me goin' with. You 'member dem colts, Mars Pendleton?" "I don't seem to recall the colts," said the Major. "You know, I was married the first year of the war and living at the old Follansbee place. But sit down, Uncle Mose. I'm glad to see you. I hope you have prospered." Uncle Mose took a chair and laid his hat carefully on the floor beside it. "Yes, sir, of late I done mouty famous. When I first got to Nebraska, dey folks come all round me to see dem mule colts. Dey ain't see no mules like dem in Nebraska. I sold dem mules for $300. Yes, sir, 300. Den I opened a blacksmith shop, suh, and made some money and bought some land. Me and my old Oman done raised up 7 chillun, and all doin' well 'cept 2 of 'em what died. 4 year ago a railroad come along and start a town slam against my land. And, suh, Mars Pendleton, Uncle Mose am worth $11,000 in money, property, and land." "I'm glad to hear it," said the Major heartily. "Glad to hear it. And dat little baby of yon, Mars Pendleton, one what you name Miss Liddy, I be bound dat little tad done growed up tell nobody wouldn't know her." The Major stepped to the door and called, "Liddy, dear, will you come?" Miss Lydia, looking quite grown up and a little worried, came in from her room. "Dar now. What I tell you? I know dat baby done be plumb growed up. You do 'member Uncle Mose, child?" "This is Aunt Cindy's Mose, Lydia," explained the Major. "He left Sunnymead for the West when you were 2 years old." "Well," said Miss Lydia, "I can hardly be expected to remember you, Uncle Mose, at that age. And as you say, I'm plumb growed up, and was a blessed long time ago. But I'm glad to see you, even if I can't remember you." And she was. And so was the Major. Something alive and tangible had come to link them with the happy past. The three sat and talked over the olden times, the Major and Uncle Mose correcting or prompting each other as they reviewed the plantation scenes and days. The Major inquired what the old man was doing so far from his home. "Uncle Mose am a delegate," he explained, "to de Grand Baptiste Convention in dis city. I never preached none, but bane a resident elder into church, and able fur to pay my own expenses, Day sent me along. And how did you know we were in Washington? Inquired Miss Lydia. Day's a culled man works into hotel where I stops, what comes from Mobile. He told me he seen Mars, Pendleton Common, outen dish here house one monin. What I come fur, continued Uncle Mose, reaching into his pocket, besides de sight of home folks, was to pay Mars, Pendleton what I owes him. Yes, sir, $300. He handed the major a roll of bills. When I left, old Mars says, take dem mule colts, Mose, and if it be so you gets able, pay fur 'em. Yes, sir, dem was his words. De war had done left, old Mars po hisself. Old Mars bane long ago dead, de debt descends to Mars Pendleton. $300. Uncle Mose is plenty able to pay now. When dat railroad buy my land, I laid off to pay fur dem mules. Count de money, Mars Pendleton. Dat's what I sold dem mules for. Yes, sir. Tears were in Major Talbot's eyes. He took Uncle Mose's hand and laid his other upon his shoulder. Dear, faithful, old servitor, he said in an unsteady voice, I don't mind saying to you that Mars Pendleton spent his last dollar in the world a week ago. We will accept this money, Uncle Mose, since, in a way, it is a sort of payment, as well as a token of the loyalty and devotion of the old regime. Lydia, my dear, take the money. You are better fitted than I to manage its expenditure. Take it, honey, said Uncle Mose. Hit belongs to you. Hit's Talbot money. After Uncle Mose had gone, Miss Lydia had a good cry for joy, and the major turned his face to a corner and smoked his clay pipe volcanically. The succeeding days saw the Talbots restored to peace and ease. Miss Lydia's face lost its worried look. The major appeared in a new frock coat, in which he looked like a wax figure personifying the memory of his golden age. Another publisher who read the manuscript of the Anecdotes and Reminiscences thought that, with a little retouching and toning down of the highlights, he could make a really bright and saleable volume of it. Altogether, the situation was comfortable, and not without the touch of hope that is often sweeter than arrived blessings. One day, about a week after their piece of good luck, a maid brought a letter for Miss Lydia to her room. The postmark showed that it was from New York. Not knowing anyone there, Miss Lydia, in a mild flutter of wonder, sat down by her table and opened the letter with her scissors. This was what she read. Dear Miss Talbot, I thought you might be glad to learn of my good fortune. I have received and accepted an offer of $200 per week by a New York stock company to play Colonel Calhoun in A Magnolia Flower. There is something else I wanted you to know. I guess you'd better not tell Major Talbot. I was anxious to make him some amends for the great help he was to me in studying the part, and for the bad humor he was in about it. He refused to let me, so I did it anyhow. I could easily spare the $300. Sincerely yours, H. Hopkins Hargraves. P.S. How did I play Uncle Mose? Major Talbot, passing through the hall, saw Miss Lydia's door open and stopped. Any mail for us this morning, Lydia, dear? He asked. Miss Lydia slid the letter beneath a fold of her dress. The Mobile Chronicle came, she said promptly. It's on the table in your study. Footnotes. From the Junior Muncie, February 1902. Republished in the volume, 6s and 7s, 1911, by Henry, copyright 1911 by Doubleday, Page & Co., reprinted by their permission. Bargain Day at Tutt House. By George Randolph Chester, 1869. Just as the stage rumbled over the rickety old bridge, creaking and groaning, the sun came from behind the clouds that had frowned all the way, and the passengers cheered up a bit. The two richly dressed matrons, who had been so utterly and unnecessarily oblivious to the presence of each other, now suspended hostilities for the moment by mutual and unspoken consent, and viewed with relief the little golden-tinted valley and the tree-clad road just beyond. The respective husbands of these two ladies exchanged a mere glance, no more of comfort. They, too, were relieved, though more by the momentary truce than by anything else. They regretted very much to be compelled to hate each other, for each had reckoned up his vis-a-vis as a rather proper sort of fellow, probably a man of some achievement, used to good living and good company. Extreme iciness was unavoidable between them, however. When one stranger has a splendidly preserved blonde wife and the other a splendidly preserved brunette wife, both of whom have won social prominence by years of hard fighting and aloofness, there remains nothing for the two men but to follow the lead, especially when directly under the eyes of the leaders. The son of the blonde matron smiled cheerfully as the welcome light flooded the coach. He was a nice-looking young man, of about 22, one might judge, and he did his smiling, though in a perfectly impersonal and correct sort of manner, at the pretty daughter of the brunette matron. The pretty daughter also smiled, but her smile was demurely directed at the trees outside, clad as they were in all the flaming glory of their autumn tints, glistening with the recent rain and dripping with gems that sparkled and flashed in the noonday sun as they fell. It is marvelous how much one can see out of the corner of the eye, while seeming to view mere scenery. The driver looked down as he drove safely off the bridge and shook his head at the swirl of water that rushed and eddied, dark and muddy, close up under the rotten planking. Then he cracked his whip, and the horses sturdily attacked the little hill. Thick, overhanging trees on either side now dimmed the light again, and the two plump matrons once more glared past the opposite shoulders, profoundly unaware of each other. The husbands took on the politely surly look required of them. The blonde son's eyes still sought the brunette daughter, but it was furtively done and quite unsuccessfully, for the daughter was now doing a little glaring on her own account. The blonde matron had just swept her eyes across the daughter's skirt, estimating the fit and material of it with contempt so artistically veiled that it could almost be understood in the dark. Roman 2. The big bays swung to the brow of the hill with ease and dashed into a small circular clearing, where a quaint little two-story building, with a mossy watering trough out in front, nestled under the shade of majestic old trees that reared their brown and scarlet crowns proudly into the sky. A long, low porch ran across the front of the structure, and a complaining sign hung out announcing, in dim, weather-flecked letters on a cracked board, that this was the Tutt house. A gray-headed man, in brown overalls and faded blue jumper, stood on the porch and shook his fist at the stage as it whirled by. "What a delightfully old-fashioned inn," exclaimed the pretty daughter. "How I should like to stop there overnight." "You would probably wish yourself away before morning, Evelyn," replied her mother indifferently. "No doubt it would be a mere siege of discomfort." The blonde matron turned to her husband. The pretty daughter had been looking at the picturesque inn between the heads of this lady and her son. "Edward, please pull down the shade behind me," she directed. "There is quite a draught from that broken window." The pretty daughter bit her lip. The brunette matron continued to stare at the shade in the exact spot upon which her gaze had been before directed, and she never quivered an eyelash. The young man seemed very uncomfortable, and he tried to look his apologies to the pretty daughter, but she could not see him now, not even if her eyes had been all corners. They were bowling along through another avenue of trees when the driver suddenly shouted, "Whoa there!" The horses were brought up with a jerk that was well-nigh fatal to the assortment of dignity inside the coach. A loud roaring could be heard, both ahead and in the rear, a sharp splitting like a fusillade of pistol shots, then a creaking and tearing of timbers. The driver bent suddenly forward. "Gid ap," he cried, and the horses sprang forward with a lurch. He swung them around a sharp bend with a skillful hand and poised his weight above the brake as they plunged at terrific speed down a steep grade. The roaring was louder than ever now, and it became deafening as they suddenly emerged from the thick underbrush at the bottom of the declivity. "Caught by gravy," ejaculated the driver, and, for the second time, he brought the coach to an abrupt stop. "Do see what is the matter, Ralph," said the blonde matron impatiently. Thus commanded, the young man swung out and asked the driver about it. "Paintsville Dam s busted," he was informed. "I been a-lookin' fur it this many a year, and this here freshet done it. You see the holler there? Well, they's 10-foot water in it, and it had ort to be stone dry. The bridge is tore out behind us, and we're stuck here till that water runs out. We can't get away till tomorrow, anyways." He pointed out the peculiar topography of the place, and Ralph got back in the coach. "We're practically on a flood-made island," he exclaimed, with one eye on the pretty daughter. "And we shall have to stop overnight at that quaint, old-fashioned inn we passed a few moments ago." The pretty daughter's eyes twinkled, and he thought he caught a swift, direct gleam from under the long lashes, but he was not sure. "Dear me, how annoying," said the blonde matron, but the brunette matron still stared, without the slightest trace of interest in anything else, at the infinitesimal spot she had selected on the affronting window shade. The two men gave sighs of resignation and cast carefully concealed glances at each other, speculating on the possibility of a cigar and a glass, and maybe a good story or two, or possibly even a game of poker after the evening meal. Who could tell what might or might not happen? Roman 3. When the stage drew up in front of the little hotel, it found Uncle Billy Tutt prepared for his revenge. In former days, the stage had always stopped at the Tutt house for the noonday meal. Since the new railway was built through the adjoining county, however, the stage trip became a mere 12-mile cross-country transfer from one railroad to another, and the stage made a later trip, allowing the passengers plenty of time for dinner before they started. Day after day, as the coach flashed by with its money-laden passengers, Uncle Billy had hoped that it would break down. But this was better, much better. The coach might be quickly mended, but not the flood. "I'm a-goin' tea, charge 'em till they squeal," he declared to the timidly protesting Aunt Margaret, "and then I'm goin' tea, charge 'em a least mite more, drat 'em." He retreated behind the rough wooden counter that did duty as a desk, slammed open the flimsy, paper-bound cash book that served as a register, and planted his elbows uncompromisingly on either side of it. "Let 'em bring in their own traps," he commented, and Aunt Margaret fled, ashamed and conscience-smitten, to the kitchen. It seemed awful. The first one out of the coach was the husband of the brunette matron, and, proceeding under instructions, he waited neither for luggage nor women folk, but hurried straight into the Tutt house. The other man would have been neck and neck with him in the race if it had not been that he paused to seize 2 suitcases and had the misfortune to drop one, which burst open and scattered a choice assortment of lingerie from one end of the dingy coach to the other. In the confusion of rescuing the fluffery, the owner of the suitcase had to sacrifice her hauteur and help her husband and son block up the aisle, while the other matron had the ineffable satisfaction of being kept waiting, at last being enabled to say, sweetly, and with the most polite consideration, "Will you kindly allow me to pass?" The blonde matron raised up and swept her skirts back perfectly flat. She was pale but collected. Her husband was pink but collected. Her son was crimson and uncollected. The brunette daughter could not have found an eye anywhere in his countenance as she rustled out after her mother. "I do hope that Belmont has been able to secure choice quarters," the triumphing matron remarked as her daughter joined her on the ground. "This place looked so very small that there can scarcely be more than one comfortable suite in it." It was a vital thrust. Only a splendidly cultivated self-control prevented the blonde matron from retaliating upon the unfortunate who had muddled things. Even so, her eyes spoke whole shelves of volumes. The man who first reached the register wrote, in a straight black scrawl, J. Belmont Van Camp, wife and daughter. There being no space left for his address, he put none down. "I want 3 adjoining rooms, en suite if possible," he demanded. "3," exclaimed Uncle Billy, scratching his head. "Won't 2 do ye? I ain't got but 6 bedrooms in th house. Me and Marked sleeps in one, and we're gettin' too old fur a shakedown on th floor. I'll have tea save 1 room fur th driver, and that leaves 4. You take 2 now." Mr. Van Camp cast a hasty glance out of the window. The other man was getting out of the coach. His own wife was stepping on the porch. "What do you ask for meals and lodging until this time tomorrow?" he interrupted. The decisive moment had arrived. Uncle Billy drew a deep breath. $2 a head, he defiantly announced. There. It was out. He wished Margaret had stayed to hear him say it. The guest did not seem to be seriously shocked, and Uncle Billy was beginning to be sorry he had not said $3, when Mr. Van Camp stopped the landlord's own breath. "I'll give you $15 for the 3 best rooms in the house," he calmly said, and landlord Tutt gasped as the money fluttered down under his nose. "Just take your folks right on up, Mr. Camp," said Uncle Billy, pouncing on the money. "TH rooms is TH, 3 right along TH, hull front o' TH house. I'll be up and make on a fire in a minute. Just take TH, Jonesville Banner and TH, Utica Clarion along with ye." As the swish of skirts marked the passage of the Van Camps up the wide hall stairway, the other party swept into the room. The man wrote in a round flourish, "Edward Eastman Ellsworth, wife and son." "I'd like 3 choice rooms and suite," he said. "Gosh," said Uncle Billy regretfully. "That's what Mr. Camp wanted, fussed off, and he got it. They hain't but TH, little room over TH, kitchen left. I'll have to put you and your wife in that, and let your boys sleep with TH driver." The consternation in the Ellsworth party was past calculating by any known standards of measurement. The thing was an outrage. It was not to be borne. They would not submit to it. Uncle Billy, however, secure in his mastery of the situation, calmly quartered them as he had said. "And let 'em splutter all they want to," he commented comfortably to himself. Roman 4. The Ellsworths were holding a family indignation meeting on the broad porch when the Van Ramps came contentedly down for a walk and brushed by them with unseeing eyes. "It makes a perfectly fascinating suite," observed Mrs. Van Camp in a pleasantly conversational tone that could be easily overheard by anyone impolite enough to listen. "That delightful old-fashioned fireplace in the middle apartment makes it an ideal sitting room, and the beds are so roomy and comfortable. I just knew it would be like this," chirruped Miss Evelyn. "I remarked as we passed the place, if you will remember, how charming it would be to stop in this dear, quaint old inn overnight. All my wishes seem to come true this year." These simple and, of course, entirely unpremeditated remarks were as vinegar and wormwood to Mrs. Ellsworth, and she gazed after the retreating Van Camps with a glint in her eye that would make one understand Lucretia Borgia at last. Her son also gazed after the retreating Van Camp. She had an exquisite figure, and she carried herself with a most delectable grace. As the party drew away from the inn, she dropped behind the elders and wandered off into a side path to gather autumn leaves. Ralph, too, started off for a walk, but naturally not in the same direction. "Edward," suddenly said Mrs. Ellsworth, "I want you to turn those people out of that suite before night." "Very well," he replied with a sigh, and got up to do it. He had wrecked a railroad and made one, and had operated successful corners in nutmegs and chicory. No task seemed impossible. He walked in to see the landlord. "What are the Van Camps paying you for those 3 rooms?" he asked. $15, Uncle Billy informed him, smoking one of Mr. Van Camp's good cigars and twiddling his thumbs in huge content. "I'll give you 30 for them. Just set their baggage outside and tell them the rooms are occupied." "No siree," rejoined Uncle Billy. "A bargain's a bargain, and I always stick to one I make." Mr. Ellsworth withdrew, but not defeated. He had never supposed that such an absurd proposition would be accepted. It was only a feeler, and he had noticed a wince of regret in his landlord. He sat down on the porch and lit a strong cigar. His wife did not bother him. She gazed complacently at the flaming foliage opposite and allowed him to think. Getting impossible things was his business in life, and she had confidence in him. "I want to rent your entire house for a week," he announced to Uncle Billy a few minutes later. It had occurred to him that the flood might last longer than they anticipated. Uncle Billy's eyes twinkled. "I reckon it can be did," he allowed. "I reckon a hotel man got a right to rent his hull house every minute." "Of course he has. How much do you want?" Uncle Billy had made one mistake in not asking this sort of folks enough, and he reflected in perplexity. "Make me a offer," he proposed. "Ef it hain't enough, I'll tell ye. You want to rent TH, hull place, back lot and all?" "No, just the mere house." "That will be enough," answered the other with a smile. He was on the point of offering $100 when he saw the little wrinkles about Mr. Tutt's eyes, and he said 75. "Show ye're jockin'," retorted Uncle Billy. He had been considered a fine horse trader in that part of the country. "Make it 125, and I'll go ye." Mr. Ellsworth counted out some bills. "Here's 100, he said. That ought to be about right. 15 more, insisted Uncle Billy. With a little frown of impatience, the other counted off the extra money and handed it over. Uncle Billy gravely handed it back. "Them's the $15 Mr. Camp give me," he explained. "You've got the Hull House for a week, and course all money that's tooken in is yourn. You kin do as ye please about rentin' out rooms to other folks, I reckon. A bargain's a bargain, and I always stick to one I make." Ralph Ellsworth stalked among the trees, feverishly searching for squirrels, scarlet leaves, and the glint of a brown walking dress, this last not being so easy to locate in sunlit autumn woods. Time after time he quickened his pace, only to find that he had been fooled by a patch of dogwood, a clump of haw bushes, or even a leaf-strewn knoll, but at last he unmistakably saw the dress, and then he slowed down to a careless saunter. She was reaching up for some brilliantly colored maple leaves, and was entirely unconscious of his presence, especially after she had seen him. Her pose showed her pretty figure to advantage, but of course, she did not know that. How should she? Ralph admired the picture very much. The hat, the hair, the gown, the dainty shoes, even the narrow strip of silken hose that was revealed as she stood upto, were all of a deep, rich brown that proved an exquisite foil for the pink and cream of her cheeks. He remembered that her eyes were almost the same shade, and wondered how it was that womenfolk happened on combinations in dress that so well set off their natural charms. The fool! He was about 3 trees away now, and a panic akin to that which hunters describe as buck ague seized him. He decided that he really had no excuse for coming any nearer. It would not do, either, to be seen staring at her if she should happen to turn her head, so he veered off, intending to regain the road. It would be impossible to do this without passing directly in her range of vision, and he did not intend to try to avoid it. He had a fine, manly figure of his own. He had just passed the nearest radius to her circle and was proceeding along the tangent that he had laid out for himself, when the unwitting maid looked carefully down and saw a tangle of roots at her very feet. She was so unfortunate, a second later, as to slip her foot in this very tangle and give her ankle ever so slight a twist. "Oh," cried Miss Van Camp, and Ralph Ellsworth flew to the rescue. He had not been noticing her at all, and yet he had started to her side before she had even cried out, which was strange. She had a very attractive voice. "May I be of assistance?" he anxiously inquired. "I think not, thank you," she replied, compressing her lips to keep back the intolerable pain and half-closing her eyes to show the fine lashes. Declining the proffered help, she extricated her foot, picked up her autumn branches, and turned away. She was intensely averse to anything that could be construed as a flirtation, even of the mildest. He could certainly see that. She took a step, swayed slightly, dropped the leaves, and clutched out her hand to him. "It is nothing," she assured him in a moment, withdrawing the hand after he had held it quite long enough. "Nothing whatever." I gave my foot a slight wrench and turned the least bit faint for a moment. "You must permit me to walk back, at least to the road, with you," he insisted, gathering up her armload of branches. "I couldn't think of leaving you here alone." As he stooped to raise the gay woodland treasures, he smiled to himself, ever so slightly. This was not his first season out, either. "Delightful spot, isn't it?" he observed as they regained the road and sauntered in the direction of the Tutt house. "Quite so," she reservedly answered. She had noticed that smile as he stooped. He must be snubbed a little. It would be so good for him. "You don't happen to know Billy Evans of Boston, do you?" he asked. "I think not. I am but very little acquainted in Boston." "Too bad," he went on. "I was rather in hopes you knew Billy. All sorts of a splendid fellow, and knows everybody." "Not quite, it seems," she reminded him, and he winced at the error. In spite of the sly smile that he had permitted to himself, he was unusually interested. He tried the weather, the flood, the accident, golf, books, and 3 good, substantial, warranted jokes, but the conversation lagged in spite of him. Miss Van Camp would not for the world have it understood that this unconventional meeting, made allowable by her wrenched ankle, could possibly fulfill the functions of a formal introduction. "What a ripping, queer old building that is," he exclaimed, making one more brave effort as they came in sight of the hotel. "It is rather," she assented. "The rooms in it are as quaint and delightful as the exterior, too." She looked as harmless and innocent as a basket of peaches as she said it, and never the suspicion of a smile deepened the dimple in the cheek toward him. The smile was glowing cheerfully away inside, though. He could feel it if he could not see it, and he laughed aloud. "Your crowd rather got the better of us there," he admitted with the keen appreciation of one still quite close to college days. "Of course, the mater is furious, but I rather look on it as a lark." She thawed like an April icicle. "It's perfectly jolly," she laughed with him. "Awfully selfish of us too, I know, but such loads of fun." They were close to the Tutt house now, and her limp, that had entirely disappeared as they emerged from the woods, now became quite perceptible. There might be people looking out of the windows, though it is hard to see why that should affect a limp. Ralph was delighted to find that a thaw had set in, and he made one more attempt to establish at least a proxy acquaintance. "You don't happen to know Payson Kingsley, of Philadelphia, do you?" "I'm afraid I don't," she replied. "I know so few Philadelphia people, you see." She was rather regretful about it this time. He really was a clever sort of a fellow, in spite of that smile. The center window in the second floor of the Tutt house swung open, its little squares of glass flashing jubilantly in the sunlight. "Mrs." Ellsworth leaned out over the sill, from the quaint old sitting room of the Van Camp apartments. "Oh, Ralph," she called in her most dulcet tones. "Kindly excuse yourself and come right on up to our suite for a few moments." Roman 6. It is not nearly so easy to take a practical joke as to perpetrate one. Evelyn was sitting thoughtfully on the porch when her father and mother returned. "Mrs." Ellsworth was sitting at the center window above, placidly looking out. Her eyes swept carelessly over the Van Camps and unconcernedly passed on to the rest of the landscape. "Mrs." Van Camp gasped and clutched the arm of her husband. There was no need. He, too, had seen the apparition. Evelyn now, for the first time, saw the real humor of the situation. She smiled as she thought of Ralph. She owed him one, but she never worried about her debts. She always managed to get them paid, principal and interest. Mr. Van Camp suddenly glowered and strode into the Tutt house. Uncle Billy met him at the door, reflectively chewing a straw, and handed him an envelope. Mr. Van Camp tore it open and drew out a note. 3 $5 bills came out with it and fluttered to the porch floor. This missive confronted him. "Mr. J. Belmont Van Camp. Dear Sir, this is to notify you that I have rented the entire Tutt house for the ensuing week, and am compelled to assume possession of the 3 second-floor front rooms. Herewith I am enclosing the $15 you paid to secure the suite. You are quite welcome to make use, as my guest, of the small room over the kitchen. You will find your luggage in that room. Regretting any inconvenience that this transaction may cause you, I am. Yours respectfully, Edward Eastman Ellsworth." Mr. Van Camp passed the note to his wife and sat down on a large chair. He was glad that the chair was comfortable and roomy. Evelyn picked up the bills and tucked them into her waist. She never overlooked any of her perquisites. "Mrs." Van Camp read the note, and the tip of her nose became white. She also sat down, but she was the first to find her voice. "Atrocious," she exclaimed. "Atrocious. Simply atrocious, Belmont. This is a house of public entertainment. They can't turn us out in this high-minded manner. Isn't there a law or something to that effect?" "It wouldn't matter if there was," he thoughtfully replied. This fellow Ellsworth would be too clever to be caught by it. He would say that the house was not a hotel, but a private residence during the period for which he has rented it. Personally, he rather admired Ellsworth. Seemed to be a resourceful sort of chap who knew how to make money behave itself and do its little tricks without balking in the harness. "Then you can make him take down the sign," his wife declared. He shook his head decidedly. "It wouldn't do, Belle," he replied. "It would be spite, not retaliation, and not at all sportsmanlike. The course you suggest would belittle us more than it would annoy them. There must be some other way." He went in to talk with Uncle Billy. "I want to buy this place," he stated. "Is it for sale?" It sartin is, replied Uncle Billy. He did not merely twinkle this time. He grinned. How much? $3,000. Mr. Tutt was used to charging by this time, and he betrayed no hesitation. I'll write you out a check at once. And Mr. Van Camp reached in his pocket with the reflection that the spot, after all, was an ideal one for a quiet summer retreat. "Air you a-goin' tea, scribble that there 3,000 on a piece o' paper?" inquired Uncle Billy, sitting bolt upright. "Ef you air a figurin' on that, Mr. Camp, jis, you save your time. I give a man $4 for 1 them check things onset, and I owe myself them $4 yit." Mr. Van Camp retired in disorder, but the thought of his wife and daughter waiting confidently on the porch stopped him. Moreover, the thing had resolved itself rather into a contest between Ellsworth and himself, and he had done a little making and breaking of men and things in his own time. He did some Gatling gun thinking out by the Newell Post, and presently rejoined Uncle Billy. "Mr. Tutt, tell me just exactly what Mr. Ellsworth rented, please," he requested. "T.H. Hull House," replied Billy, and then he somewhat sternly added, "paid me spot cash fur it, too." Mr. Van Camp took a wad of loose bills from his trousers pocket, straightened them out leisurely, and placed them in his bill book, along with some smooth yellowbacks of eye-bulging denominations. Uncle Billy sat up and stopped twiddling his thumbs. "Nothing was said about the furniture, was there?" suavely inquired Van Camp. Uncle Billy leaned blankly back in his chair. Little by little the light dawned on the ex-horse trader. The crow's feet reappeared about his eyes, his mouth twitched, he smiled, he grinned, then he slapped his thigh and haw-hawed. "No," roared Uncle Billy. "No, there wasn't, by gum. Nothing but the house." His very own words, chuckled Uncle Billy. "Just T.H. mere house," says he, and he gets it. "A bargain's a bargain, and I a lose stick to one I make. How much for the furniture for the week?" $50. Mr. Tutt knew how to do business with this kind of people now, you bet. Mr. Van Camp promptly counted out the money. "Drat it," commented Uncle Billy to himself. "I could 'a' got more. Now where can we make ourselves comfortable with this furniture?" Uncle Billy chirked up. All was not yet lost. "Vol," he reflectively drawled, "there's T.H. new barn. It hain't been used for nothin' yit, sanct I built it 2 years ago. I just hadn't T.H. heart tea, put T.H. critters in it as long as T.H. Ole one stood up." The others smiled at this flashlight on Uncle Billy's character, and they went out to look at the barn. Romans 7. Uncle Billy came back from the Tutt House Annex, as Mr. Van Camp dubbed the barn, with enough more money to make him love all the world until he got used to having it. Uncle Billy belongs to a large family. Mr. Van Camp joined the women on the porch and explained the attractively novel situation to them. They were chatting gaily when the Ellsworths came down the stairs. Mr. Ellsworth paused for a moment to exchange a word with Uncle Billy. "Mr. Tutt," said he, laughing, "if we go for a bit of exercise, will you guarantee us the possession of our rooms when we come back?" "Yes, sirree," Uncle Billy assured him. "They shan't nobody take them rooms away from you fur money, marbles, ner chalk. A bargain's a bargain, and I a lose stick to one I make." And he virtuously took a chew of tobacco while he inspected the afternoon sky with a clear conscience. "I want to get some of those splendid autumn leaves to decorate our cozy apartments, Mrs. Ellsworth told her husband as they passed in hearing of the Van Camps. "Do you know those old-time rag rugs are the most oddly decorative effects that I have ever seen. They are so rich in color and so exquisitely blended." There were reasons why this poisoned arrow failed to rankle, but the Van Camps did not trouble to explain. They were waiting for Ralph to come out and join his parents. Ralph, it seemed, however, had decided not to take a walk. He had already fatigued himself, he had explained, and his mother had favored him with a significant look. She could readily believe him, she had assured him, and had then left him in scorn. The Van Camps went out to consider the arrangement of the barn. Evelyn returned first and came out on the porch to find a handkerchief. It was not there, but Ralph was. She was very much surprised to see him, and she intimated as much. "It's dreadfully damp in the woods," he explained. "By the way, you don't happen to know the Whitleys, of Washington, do you?" Most excellent people. I'm quite sorry that I do not, she replied. But you will have to excuse me. We shall be kept very busy with arranging our apartments. Ralph sprang to his feet with a ludicrous expression. Not the second-floor front suite, he exclaimed. Oh no. Not at all, she reassured him. He laughed lightly. Honors are about even in that game, he said. Evelyn, called her mother from the hall. Please come and take those front suite curtains down to the barn. Pardon me while we take the next trick, remarked Evelyn with a laugh quite as light and gleeful as his own, and disappeared into the hall. He followed her slowly and was met at the door by her father. You are the younger Mr. Ellsworth, I believe, politely said Mr. Van Camp. Ralph Ellsworth. Yes, sir. Here is a note for your father. It is unsealed. You are quite at liberty to read it. Mr. Van Camp bowed himself away, and Ralph opened the note, which read, Edward Eastman Ellsworth, Esquire. Dear Sir, this is to notify you that I have rented the entire furniture of the Tutt house for the ensuing week, and am compelled to assume possession of that in the 3 second-floor front rooms, as well as all the balance not in actual use by Mr. and Mrs. Tutt and the driver of the stage. You are quite welcome, however, to make use of the furnishings in the small room over the kitchen. Your luggage you will find undisturbed. Regretting any inconvenience that this transaction may cause you, I remain. Yours respectfully, J. Belmont Van Camp. Ralph scratched his head in amused perplexity. It devolved upon him to even up the affair a little before his mother came back. He must support the family reputation for resourcefulness, but it took quite a bit of scalp irritation before he aggravated the right idea into being. As soon as the idea came, he went in and made a hide-bound bargain with Uncle Billy. Then he went out into the hall and waited until Evelyn came down with a huge armload of window curtains. Honors are still even, he remarked. I have just bought all the edibles about the place, whether in the cellar, the house, or any of the surrounding structures, in the ground, above the ground, dead or alive, and a bargain's a bargain as between man and man. Clever of you, I'm sure, commented Miss Van Camp reflectively. Suddenly, her lips parted with a smile that revealed a double row of most beautiful teeth. He meditatively watched the curve of her lips. Isn't that rather a heavy load? He suggested. I'd be delighted to help you move the things, don't you know. It is quite kind of you, and what the men would call game, I believe, under the circumstances, she answered, but really it will not be necessary. We have hired Mr. Tutt and the driver to do the heavier part of the work, and the rest of it will be really a pleasant diversion. No doubt, agreed Ralph with an appreciative grin. By the way, you don't happen to know Maud and Dorothy Partridge, of Baltimore, do you? Stunning pretty girls, both of them, and no end of swells. I know so very few people in Baltimore, she murmured, and tripped on down to the barn. Ralph went out on the porch and smoked. There was nothing else that he could do. Roman 8. It was growing dusk when the elder Ellsworths returned, almost hidden by great masses of autumn boughs. You should have been with us, Ralph, enthusiastically said his mother. I never saw such gorgeous tints in all my life. We have brought nearly the entire woods with us. It was a good idea, said Ralph. A stunning good idea. They may come in handy to sleep on. Mrs. Ellsworth turned cold. What do you mean? She gasped. Ralph, sternly demanded his father, you don't mean to tell us that you let the Van Camps jockey us out of those rooms after all. Indeed no, he airily responded. Just come right on up and see. He led the way into the suite and struck a match. One solitary candle had been left upon the mantel shelf. Ralph thought that this had been overlooked, but his mother afterwards set him right about that. Mrs. Van Camp had cleverly left it so that the Ellsworths could see how dreadfully bare the place was. 1 candle in 3 rooms is drearier than darkness anyhow. Mrs. Ellsworth took in all the desolation, the dismal expanse of the now enormous apartments, the shabby walls, the hideous bright spots where pictures had hung, the splintered flooring, the great, gaunt windows, and she gave in. She had met with snub after snub, and cut after cut. In her social climb, she had had the cook quit in the middle of an important dinner. She had had every disconcerting thing possible happen to her, but this was the last bale of straw. She sat down on a suitcase in the middle of the biggest room and cried. Ralph, having waited for this, now told about the food transaction, and she hastily pushed the last coming tear back into her eye. "Good," she cried. "They will be up here soon. They will be compelled to compromise, and they must not find me with red eyes." She cast a hasty glance around the room, then, in a sudden panic, seized the candle and explored the other two. She went wildly out into the hall, back into the little room over the kitchen, downstairs, everywhere, and returned in consternation. "There's not a single mirror left in the house," she moaned. Ralph heartlessly grinned. He could appreciate that this was a characteristic woman trick, and wondered admiringly whether Evelyn or her mother had thought of it. However, this was a time for action. "I'll get you some water to bathe your eyes," he offered, and ran into the little room over the kitchen to get a pitcher. A cracked shaving mug was the only vessel that had been left, but he hurried down into the yard with it. This was no time for fastidiousness. He had barely creaked the pump handle when Mr. Van Camp hurried up from the barn. "I beg your pardon, sir," said Mr. Van Camp, "but this water belongs to us. My daughter bought it, all that is in the ground, above the ground, or that may fall from the sky upon these premises." Roman 9. The mutual siege lasted until after 7 o'clock, but it was rather one-sided. The Van Camps could drink all the water they liked, it made them no hungrier. If the Ellsworths ate anything, however, they grew thirstier, and, moreover, water was necessary if anything worthwhile was to be cooked. They knew all this, and resisted until Mrs. Ellsworth was tempted and fell. She ate a sandwich and choked. It was heartbreaking, but Ralph had to be sent down with a plate of sandwiches and an offer to trade them for water. Halfway between the pump and the house he met Evelyn, coming with a small pail of the precious fluid. They both stopped stock still, then, seeing that it was too late to retreat, both laughed and advanced. "Who wins now?" bantered Ralph as they made the exchange. "It looks to me like a misdeal," she gaily replied, and was moving away when he called her back. "You don't happen to know the Gately's of New York, do you?" He was quite anxious to know. "I am truly sorry, but I am acquainted with so few people in New York. We are from Chicago, you know." "Oh," said he blankly, and took the water up to the Ellsworth suite. "Mrs. Ellsworth cheered up considerably when she heard that Ralph had been met halfway, but her eyes snapped when he confessed that it was Miss Van Camp who had met him. "I hope you are not going to carry on a flirtation with that overdressed creature," she blazed. "Why, Mother," exclaimed Ralph, shocked beyond measure. "What right have you to accuse either this young lady or myself of flirting?" "Flirting, Mrs. Ellsworth suddenly attacked the fire with quite unnecessary energy. Down at the barn, the wide thrashing floor had been covered with gay rag rugs, and strewn with tables, couches, and chairs in picturesque profusion. Roomy box stalls had been carpeted deep with clean straw, curtained off with gaudy bedquilts, and converted into cozy sleeping apartments. The mow and the stalls had been screened off with lace curtains and blazing counterpanes, and the whole effect was one of oriental luxury and splendor. Alas, it was only an effect. The red-hot parlor stove smoked abominably. The pipe carried other smoke out through the homo window, only to let it blow back again. Chill cross drafts whistled in from cracks too numerous to be stopped up, and the miserable Van Camps could only cough and shiver, and envy the Tutts and the driver, non-combatants who had been fed 2 hours before. Up in the second-floor suite, there was a roaring fire in the big fireplace, but there was a chill in the room that no mere fire could drive away, the chill of absolute emptiness. A man can outlive hardships that would kill a woman, but a woman can endure discomforts that would drive a man crazy. Mr. Ellsworth went out to hunt up Uncle Billy, with an especial solace in mind. The landlord was not in the house, but the yellow gleam of a lantern revealed his presence in the woodshed, and Mr. Ellsworth stepped in upon him just as he was pouring something yellow and clear into a tumbler from a big jug that he had just taken from under the flooring. "How much do you want for that jug and its contents?" he asked, with a sigh of gratitude that this supply had been overlooked. Before Mr. Tutt could answer, Mr. Van Camp hurried in at the door. "Wait a moment," he cried. "I want to bid on that. This here jug hain't fur sale at no price," Uncle Billy emphatically announced, nipping all negotiations right in the bud. "It's too pesky hard to sneak this here liquor in past Marget, but I reckon it's my treat, gents. Ye kin have all ye want." 1 minute later, Mr. Van Camp and Mr. Ellsworth were seated, one on a sawbuck and the other on a nail keg, comfortably eyeing each other across the workbench, and each was holding up a tumbler 1/3 filled with the golden yellow liquid. "Your health, sir," courteously proposed Mr. Ellsworth. "And to you, sir," gravely replied Mr. Van Camp. Ralph and Evelyn happened to meet at the pump, quite accidentally, after the former had made half a dozen 5-minute-apart trips for a drink. It was Miss Van Camp, this time, who had been studying on the mutual acquaintance problem. "You don't happen to know the Tylers of Parkersburg, do you?" she asked. "The Tylers? I should say I do," was the unexpected and enthusiastic reply. "Why, we are on our way now to Miss Georgiana Tyler's wedding to my friend Jimmy Carston. I'm to be best man." "How delightful," she exclaimed. "We are on the way there, too. Georgiana was my dearest chum at school, and I am to be her best girl." "Let's go around on the porch and sit down," said Ralph. Roman 12. Mr. Van Camp, back in the woodshed, looked about him with an eye of content. "Rather cozy for a woodshed," he observed. "I wonder if we couldn't scare up a little session of Dollar Limit." Both Uncle Billy and Mr. Ellsworth were willing. Death and poker level All-Americans. A fourth hand was needed, however. The stage driver was in bed and asleep, and Mr. Ellsworth volunteered to find the extra player. "I'll get Ralph," he said. "He plays a fairly stiff game." He finally found his son on the porch, apparently alone, and stated his errand. "Thank you, but I don't believe I care to play this evening," was the astounding reply, and Mr. Ellsworth looked closer. He made out, then, a dim figure on the other side of Ralph. "Oh, of course not," he blundered and went back to the woodshed. Three-handed poker is a miserable game, and it seldom lasts long. It did not in this case. After Uncle Billy had won the only jackpot deserving of the name, he was allowed to go blissfully to sleep with his hand on the handle of the big jug. After poker, there is only one other always available amusement for men, and that is business. The two travelers were quite well acquainted when Ralph put his head in at the door. "Thought I'd find you here," he explained. "It just occurred to me to wonder whether you gentlemen had discovered, as yet, that we are all to be house guests at the Carston Tyler wedding." "Why, no," exclaimed his father in pleased surprise. "It is a most agreeable coincidence. Mr. Van Camp, allow me to introduce my son Ralph. Mr. Van Camp and myself, Ralph, have found out that we shall be considerably thrown together in a business way from now on. He has just purchased control of the metropolitan and western string of interurbans." "Delighted, I'm sure," murmured Ralph, shaking hands, and then he slipped out as quickly as possible. Someone seemed to be waiting for him. Perhaps another 20 minutes had passed, when one of the men had an illuminating idea that resulted, later on, in pleasant relations for all of them. It was about time for Mrs. Ellsworth up in the bare suite and Mrs. Van Camp down in the drafty barn, both wrapped up to the chin and both still chilly, had about reached the limit of patience and endurance. "Why can't we make things a little more comfortable for all concerned?" suggested Mr. Van Camp. "Suppose, as a starter, that we have Mrs. Van Camp give a shiver party down in the barn." "Good idea," agreed Mr. Ellsworth. "A little diplomacy will do it. Each one of us will have to tell his wife that the other fellow made the first abject overtures." Mr. Van Camp grinned understandingly and agreed to the infamous ruse. "By the way," continued Mr. Ellsworth with a still happier thought, "you must allow Mrs. Ellsworth to furnish the dinner for Mrs. Van Camp's shiver party." "Dinner?" gasped Mr. Van Camp. "By all means." Both men felt an anxious, yawning in the region of the appetite, and a yearning moisture wetted their tongues. They looked at the slumbering Uncle Billy and decided to see Mrs. Tutt themselves about a good, hot dinner for 6. "Law me," exclaimed Aunt Margaret when they appeared at the kitchen door. "I swan I thought you folks, you'd never come to your senses." Here I've had a big pot o' stewed, chicken ready on the stove for 2 mortal hours. I can give you that, and smashed taters and chicken gravy, and dried corn, and hot corn pone, and currant gel, and strawberry preserves, and my own cannon o' peaches, and pumpkin pie and coffee. Will that do ye? Would it do? Would it do? As Aunt Margaret talked, the kitchen door swung wide, and the two men were stricken speechless with astonishment. There, across from each other at the kitchen table, sat the utterly selfish and traitorous younger members of the rival houses of Ellsworth and Van Camp, deep in the joys of chicken, and mashed potatoes, and gravy, and hot corn pone, and all the other fixings, laughing and chatting gaily like chums of years standing. They had seemingly just come to an agreement about something or other, for Evelyn, waving the shorter end of a broken wishbone, was vivaciously saying to Ralph, "A bargain's a bargain, and I always stick to one I make." Footnotes. From McClure's Magazine, June 1905. Copyright 1905 by the S.S. McClure Co., republished by the author's permission. École. By Grace MacGowan Cook, 1863. A boy in an unnaturally clean, country-laundered collar walked down a long white road. He scuffed the dust up wantonly, for he wished to veil the all-too-brilliant polish of his cowhide shoes. Also the memory of the whiteness and slipperiness of his collar oppressed him. He was fain to look like one accustomed to social diversions. A man hurried from hall to hall of pleasure, without time between to change collar or polish boot. He stooped and rubbed a crumb of earth on his overfresh neck linen. This did not long sustain his drooping spirit. He was mentally adrift upon the hints and helps to young men in business and social relations, which had suggested to him his present enterprise, when the appearance of a second youth, taller and broader than himself, with a shock of light curling hair and a crop of freckles that advertised a rich soil threw him a lifeline. He put his thumbs to his lips and whistled in a peculiarly ear-splitting way. The two boys had sat on the same bench at Sunday school not 3 hours before. Yet what a change had come over the world for one of them since then. "Hello. Where you goin', Ob?" asked the newcomer gruffly. "Callin'," replied the boy in the collar laconically, but with carefully averted gaze. "On the girls?" inquired the other awestruck. "In Mount Pisgah you saw the girls home from night church, socials, or parties. You could hang over the gate, and you might walk with a girl in the cemetery of a Sunday afternoon. But to ring a front door bell and ask for Miss Hart's desire, one must have been in long trousers at least 3 years. And the two boys confronted in the dusty road had worn these dignifying garments barely 6 months. "Girls," said Abner loftily. "I don't know about girls. I'm just going to call on one girl, Champ Claiborne." He marched on as though the conversation was at an end, but Ross hung upon his flank. Ross and Champ were neighbors, comrades in all sorts of mischief. He was in doubt whether to halt Abner and pummel him, or propose to enlist under his banner. "Do you reckon you could?" he debated, trotting along by the irresponsive Jilton boy. "Run home to your mother," growled the originator of the plan savagely. "You ain't old enough to call on girls, anybody can see that, but I am, and I'm going to call on Champ Claiborne." Again the name acted as a spur on Ross. "With your collar and boots all dirty," he jeered. "They won't know you're Colland." The boy in the road stopped short in his dusty tracks. He was an intense creature, and he whitened at the tragic insinuation, longing for the wholesome stay and companionship of freckle-faced Ross. "I put the dirt on purpose so's to look kind of careless," he half whispered, in an agony of doubt. "S'pose I'd better go into your house and try to wash it off." "Reckon your mother would let me." "I've got 2 clean collars," announced the other boy, proudly generous. "I'll lend you one. You can put it on while I'm getting ready. I'll tell Mother that we're just stepping out to do a little calling on the girls." Here was an ally worthy of the cause. Abner welcomed him, in spite of certain jealous twinges. He reflected with satisfaction that there were 2 Claiborne girls, and though Alicia was so stiff and prim that no boy would ever think of calling on her, there was still the hope that she might draw Ross's fire, and leave him, Abner, to make the numerous remarks he had stored up in his mind from hints and helps to young men in social and business relations, to Champ alone. "Mrs." Pryor received them with the easygoing kindness of the mother of one son. She followed them into the dining room to kiss and feed him with an absent, "Howdy, Abner, how's your mother?" Abner, big with the importance of their mutual intention, inclined his head stiffly and looked toward Ross for explanation. He trembled a little, but it was with delight, as he anticipated the effect of the speech Ross had outlined. But it did not come. "I'm not hungry, Mother," was the revised edition which the freckle-faced boy offered to the maternal ear. We are going over to Mr. Claiborne's, on an errand for Abner's father." The black-eyed boy looked reproach as they clattered up the stairs to Ross's room, where the clean collar was produced and a small stock of ties. "You'd wear a necktie, wouldn't you?" Ross asked, spreading them upon the bureau top. "Yes. But make it fall carelessly over your shirt front," advised the student of hints and helps. "Your collar is miles too big for me. Say, I've got a wad of white chewing gum. Would you flat it out and stick it over the collar butt? Maybe that would fill up some. You kick my foot if you see me turning my head so's to knock it off." "Better button up your vest," cautioned Ross, laboring with the careless fall of his tie. "Hello. I want that easy air which presupposes familiarity with society. That's what it says in my book," objected Abner. "Sure," Ross returned to his more familiar jeering attitude. "Loosen up all your clothes, then. Why don't you untie your shoes? Flop a sock down over one of 'em. That looks easy, all right." Abner buttoned his vest. "It gives a man lots of confidence to know he's good-looking," he remarked, taking all the room in front of the mirror. Ross, at the washstand soaking his hair to get the curl out of it, grumbled some unintelligible response. The two boys went down the stairs with tremulous hearts. "Why, you've put on another clean shirt, Rossie, Mrs. Pryor called from her chair. Mother's eyes can see so far. "Well, don't get into any dirty play and soil it." The boys walked in silence, but it was a pregnant silence, for as the roof of the Claiborne house began to peer above the crest of the hill, Ross plumped down on a stone and announced, "I ain't goin'." "Come on," urged the black-eyed boy. "It'll be fun, and everybody will respect us more. Champ won't throw rocks at us in recess time after we've called on her." "She couldn't." "Called," grunted Ross. "I couldn't make a call any more than a cow. What I say. What I do. I can behave all right when you just go to people's houses, but a call." Abner hesitated. Should he give away his brilliant inside information, drawn from the Hints and Helps book, and be rivaled in the glory of his manners and bearing? Why should he not pass on alone, perfectly composed, and reap the field of glory unsupported? His knees gave way, and he sat down without intending it. "Don't you tell anybody, and I'll put you on to exactly what grown-up gentlemen say and do when they go calling on the girls," he began. "Fire away," retorted Ross gloomily. "Nobody will find out from me. Dead men tell no tales. If I'm fool enough to go, I don't expect to come out of it alive." Abner rose, white and shaking, and thrusting 3 fingers into the buttoning of his vest, extending the other hand like an orator, proceeded to instruct the freckled, perspiring disciple at his feet. "Hang your hat on the rack or give it to a servant." Ross nodded intelligently. "He could do that. Let your legs be gracefully disposed, one hand on the knee, the other." Abner came to an unhappy pause. "I forget what a fellow does with the other hand. Might stick it in your pocket, loudly, or expectorate on the carpet. Indulge in little frivolity. Let a rich stream of conversation flow." Ross mentally dug within himself for sources of rich streams of conversation. He found a dry soil. "What you goin' to talk about?" he demanded fretfully. "I won't go a step farther till I know what I'm goin' to say when I get there." Abner began to repeat paragraphs from Hints and Helps. "It is best to remark," he opened in an unnatural voice, "how well you are looking, although fulsome compliments should be avoided. When seated, ask the young lady who her favorite composer is." "What's a composer?" inquired Ross, with visions of soothing syrup in his mind. "A man that makes up music." "Don't butt in that way, you put me all out. Composer is." "Name yours." "Ask her what piece of music she likes best." "Name yours." "If the lady is musical, here ask her to play or sing." This chanted recitation seemed to have a hypnotic effect on the freckled boy. His big pupils contracted each time Abner came to the repetent, "Name yours." "I'm tired already," he grumbled, but some spell made him rise and fare farther. When they had entered the Claiborne gate, they leaned toward each other like young saplings weakened at the root and locking branches to keep what shallow foothold on earth remained. "You're goin' in first," asserted Ross, but without conviction. It was his custom to tear up to this house a dozen times a week, on his father's old horse or afoot. He was wont to yell for Champ as he approached, and quarrel joyously with her while he performed such errand as he had come upon. But he was gagged and hamstrung now by the hypnotism of Abner's scheme. "Walk quietly up the steps, ring the bell and lay your card on the servant," quoted Abner, who had never heard of a server. "Lay your card on the servant," echoed Ross. "Katie Dodge. There's a porch to cross after you go up the steps. Does it say anything about that?" "It says that the card should be placed on the servant," Abner reiterated doggedly. "If Katie dodges, it ain't any business of mine. There are no porches in my book. Just walk across it like anybody. We'll ask for Miss Champ Claiborne." "We haven't got any cards," discovered Ross with hope. "I have," announced Abner pompously. "I had some struck off in Chicago. I ordered 'em by mail. They got my name pillow, but there's a scalloped gilt border around it. You can write your name on my card. Got a pencil?" He produced the bit of cardboard. Ross fished up a chewed stump of lead pencil, took it in cold, stiff fingers, and disfigured the square with eccentric scribblings. "They'll know who it's meant for," he said apologetically, "because I'm here. What's likely to happen after we get rid of the card? I told you about hanging your hat on the rack and disposing your legs." "I remember now," sighed Ross. They had been going slower and slower. The angle of inclination toward each other became more and more pronounced. "We must stand by each other," whispered Abner. "I will if I can stand at all," murmured the other boy huskily. "Oh, Lord." They had rounded the big clump of evergreens and found Aunt Missouri Claiborne placidly rocking on the front porch. Directed to mount steps and ring bell, to lay cards upon the servant, how should one deal with a rosy-faced, plump lady of uncertain years in a rocking chair? What should a caller lay upon her? A lion in the way could not have been more terrifying. Even retreat was cut off. Aunt Missouri had seen them. "Howdy, boys, how are you?" she said, rocking peacefully. The two stood before her like detected criminals. Then, to Ross's dismay, Abner sank down on the lowest step of the porch, the westering sun full in his hopeless eyes. He sat on his cap. It was characteristic that the freckled boy remained standing. He would walk up those steps according to plan and agreement, if at all. He accepted no compromise. Folding his straw hat into a battered cone, he watched anxiously for the delivery of the card. He was not sure what Aunt Missouri's attitude might be if it were laid on her. He bent down to his companion. "Go ahead," he whispered. "Lay the card." Abner raised appealing eyes. "In a minute." "Give me time," he pleaded. "Mars Ross, Mars Ross." "Head him off," sounded a yell, and Babe, the houseboy, came around the porch in pursuit of two half-grown chickens. "Help him, Rossie," prompted Aunt Missouri sharply. "You boys can stay to supper and have some of the chicken if you help catch them." Had Ross taken time to think, he might have reflected that gentlemen making formal calls seldom join in a chase after the main dish of the family supper. But the needs of Babe were instant. The lad flung himself sidewise, caught one chicken in his hat, while Babe fell upon the other in the manner of a football player. Ross handed the pullet to the houseboy, fearing that he had done something very much out of character, then pulled the reluctant Negro toward to the steps. "Babe's a servant," he whispered to Abner, who had sat rigid through the entire performance. "I helped him with the chickens, and he's got to stand gentle while you lay the card on." Confronted by the act itself, Abner was suddenly aware that he knew not how to begin. He took refuge in dissimulation. "Hush," he whispered back. "Don't you see Mr. Claiborne's come out? He's going to read something to us." Ross plumped down beside him. "Never mind the card, tell him," he urged. "Tell him yourself." "No, let's cut and run." I think the worst of it is over. When Champ sees us, she'll. Mention of Champ stiffened Ross's spine. If it had been glorious to call upon her, how very terrible she would make it should they attempt calling, fail, and the failure come to her knowledge. Some things were easier to endure than others. He resolved to stay till the call was made. For half an hour the boys sat with drooping heads, and the old gentleman read aloud, presumably to Aunt Missouri and themselves. Finally, their restless eyes discerned the two Claiborne girls, walking serene in Sunday trim under the trees at the edge of the lawn. Arms entwined, they were whispering together and giggling a little. A caller, Ross dared not use his voice to shout, nor his legs to run toward them. "Why don't you go and talk to the girls, Rossie?" Aunt Missouri asked, in the kindness of her heart. "Don't be noisy, it's Sunday, you know, and don't get to playing anything that'll dirty up your good clothes." Ross pressed his lips hard together. His heart swelled with the rage of the misunderstood. Had the card been in his possession, he would, at that instant, have laid it on Aunt Missouri without a qualm. "What is it?" demanded the old gentleman, a bit testily. "The girls want to hear you read, Father," said Aunt Missouri shrewdly, and she got up and trotted on short, fat ankles to the girls in the arbor. The three returned together, Alicia casting curious glances at the uncomfortable youths, Champ threatening to burst into giggles with every breath. Abner sat hard on his cap and blushed silently. Ross twisted his hat into a three-cornered wreck. The two girls settled themselves noisily on the upper step. The old man read on and on. The sun sank lower. The hills were red in the west, as though a brush fire flamed behind their crests. Abner stole a furtive glance at his companion in misery, and the dolor of Ross's countenance somewhat assuaged his anguish. The freckle-faced boy was thinking of the village over the hill, a certain pleasant white house set back in a green yard, past whose gate the two-plank sidewalk ran. He knew lamps were beginning to wink in the windows of the neighbors about, as though the houses said, "Our boys are all at home, but Ross Pryor's out trying to call on the girls and can't get anybody to understand it." Oh, that he were walking down those two planks, drawing a stick across the pickets, lifting high happy feet which could turn in at that gate. He wouldn't care what the lamps said then. He wouldn't even mind if the whole Claiborne family died laughing at him, if only some power would raise him up from this paralyzing spot and put him behind the safe barriers of his own home. The old man's voice lapsed into silence. The light was becoming too dim for his reading. Aunt Missouri turned and called over her shoulder into the shadows of the big hall, "You babe. Go put 2 extra plates on the supper table." The boys grew red from the tips of their ears, and as far as anyone could see under their wilting collars. Abner felt the lump of gum come loose and slip down a cold spine. Had their intentions but been known, this inferential invitation would have been most welcome. It was but to rise up and thunder out, "We came to call on the young ladies." They did not rise. They did not thunder out anything. Babe brought a lamp and set it inside the window, and Mr. Claiborne resumed his reading. Champ giggled and said that Alicia made her. Alcia drew her skirts about her, sniffed and looked virtuous, and said she didn't see anything funny to laugh at. The supper bell rang. The family, evidently taking it for granted that the boys would follow, went in. Alone for the first time, Abner gave up. "This ain't any use," he complained. "We ain't calling on anybody." "Why didn't you lay on the card?" demanded Ross fiercely. "Why didn't you say, 'We've just dropped in to call on Miss Champ'? It's a pleasant evening. We feel we must be going, like you said you would." Then we could have lifted our hats and got away decently. Abner showed no resentment. "Oh, if it's so easy, why didn't you do it yourself?" he groaned. "Somebody's coming," Ross muttered hoarsely. "Say it now. Say it quick." The somebody proved to be Aunt Missouri, who advanced only as far as the end of the hall and shouted cheerfully. The idea of a growing boy not coming to meals when the bell rings. "I thought you two would be in there ahead of us. Come on," and clinging to their head coverings as though these contained some charm whereby the owners might be rescued, the unhappy callers were herded into the dining room. There were many things on the table that boys like. Both were becoming fairly cheerful when Aunt Missouri checked the biscuit plate with, "I treat my neighbors, children just like I'd want children of my own treated." If your mothers let you eat all you want, say so, and I don't care. But if either of them is a little bit particular, why, I'd stop at 6. Still reeling from this blow, the boys finally rose from the table and passed out with the family, their hats clutched to their bosoms, and clinging together for mutual aid and comfort. During the usual Sunday evening, singing Champ laughed, till Aunt Missouri threatened to send her to bed. Abner's card slipped from his hand and dropped face up on the floor. He fell upon it and tore it into infinitesimal pieces. "That must have been a love letter," said Aunt Missouri, in a pause of the music. "You boys are getting, most old enough to think about beginning to call on the girls." Her eyes twinkled. Ross growled like a stoned cur. Abner took a sudden dive into hints and helps and came up with, "You flatter us, Miss Claiborne," whereat Ross snickered out like a human boy. They all stared at him. "It sounds so funny to call Aunt Missouri Mies Claiborne," the lad of the freckles explained. "Funny," Aunt Missouri reddened. "I don't see any particular joke in my having my maiden name." Abner, who instantly guessed at what was in Ross's mind, turned white at the thought of what they had escaped. Suppose he had laid on the card and asked for Miss Claiborne. "What's the matter, Champ?" inquired Ross in a fairly natural tone. The air he had drawn into his lungs when he laughed at Abner seemed to relieve him from the numbing gentility which had bound his powers since he joined Abner's ranks. "Nothing." "I laughed because you laughed," said the girl. The singing went forward fitfully. Servants traipsed through the darkened yard, going home for Sunday night. Aunt Missouri went out and held some low-toned parley with them. Champ yawned with insulting enthusiasm. Presently both girls quietly disappeared. Aunt Missouri never returned to the parlor, evidently thinking that the girls would attend to the final amenities with their callers. They were left alone with old Mr. Claiborne. They sat as though bound in their chairs, while the old man read in silence for a while. Finally he closed his book, glanced about him, and observed absently, "So you boys were to spend the night?" Then, as he looked at their startled faces, "I'm right, am I not? You are to spend the night." Oh, for courage to say, "Thank you, no. We'll be going now. We just came over to call on Miss Champ." But thought of how this would sound in face of the facts, the painful realization that they dared not say it because they had not said it, locked their lips. Their feet were lead, their tongues stiff and too large for their mouths. Like creatures in a nightmare, they moved stiffly, one might have said creakingly, up the stairs and received each a bedroom candle. "Good night, children," said the absent-minded old man. The two gurgled out some sounds, which were intended for words, and dozed behind the bedroom door. "They've put us to bed." Abner's black eyes flashed fire. His nervous hands clutched at the collar Ross had lent him. "That's what I get for coming here with you, Ross Pryor," and tears of humiliation stood in his eyes. In his turn, Ross showed no resentment. "What I'm worried about is my mother," he confessed. "She's so sharp about finding out things. She wouldn't tease me, she'd just be sorry for me. But she'll think I went home with you. I'd like to see my mother make a fuss about my calling on the girls," growled Abner, glad to let his rage take a safe direction. "Calling on the girls? Have we called on any girls?" demanded clear-headed, honest Ross. "Not exactly, yet," admitted Abner reluctantly. "Come on, let's go to bed. Mr. Claiborne asked us, and he's the head of this household. It isn't anybody's business what we came for." "I'll slip off my shoes and lie down till Babe ties up the dog in the morning," said Ross. "Then we can get away before any of the family is up." Oh, youth, youth, youth with its rash promises. Worn out with misery, the boys slept heavily. The first sound that either heard in the morning was Babe hammering upon their bedroom door. They crouched guiltily and looked into each other's eyes. "Let pretend we ain't here and he'll go away," breathed Abner. But Babe was made of sterner stuff. He rattled the knob. He turned it. He put in a black face with a grin which divided it from ear to ear. "Katie say I muse called dem fool boys to breakfast," he announced. "I never named you, all dat. Katie, she say dat." "Breakfast," echoed Ross in a daze. "Yes, sah, breakfast," reasserted Babe, coming entirely into the room and looking curiously about him. "Ain't you all done been to bed at all?" wrapping his arms about his shoulders and shaking with silent ecstasies of mirth. The boys threw themselves upon him and ejected him. "Sent up a servant to call us to breakfast," snarled Abner. If they'd only sent their old servant to the door in the first place, all this would have happened. "I'm just that way when I get thrown off the track. You know how it was when I tried to repeat those things to you. I had to go clear back to the beginning when I got interrupted." "Does that mean that you're still hanging around here to begin over and make a call?" asked Ross darkly. "I won't go down to breakfast if you are." Abner brightened a little as he saw Ross becoming wordy in his rage. "I dare you to walk downstairs and say, 'We just dropped in to call on Miss Champ,'" he said. I darn it all. There goes the second bell. We may as well trot down." "Don't leave me, Ross," pleaded the Jilton boy. "I can't stay here, and I can't go down." The tone was hysterical. The boy with freckles took his companion by the arm without another word and marched him down the stairs. "We may get a chance yet to call on Champ all by herself out on the porch or in the arbor before she goes to school," he suggested, by way of putting some spine into the black-eyed boy. An emphatic bell rang when they were halfway down the stairs. Clutching their hats, they slunk into the dining room. Even Mr. Claiborne seemed to notice something unusual in their bearing as they settled into the chairs assigned to them, and asked them kindly if they had slept well. It was plain that Aunt Missouri had been posting him as to her understanding of the intentions of these young men. The state of affairs gave an electric hilarity to the atmosphere. Babe traveled from the sideboard to the table, trembling like chocolate pudding. Katie insisted on bringing in the cakes herself, and grinned as she whisked her starched blue skirts in and out of the dining room. A dimple even showed itself at the corners of pretty Alicia's prim little mouth. Champ giggled till Ross heard Katie whisper, "Now you got one dem snickerin' spells again. You gwine bust yo, dress buttons off in the back if you don't mind." As the spirits of those about them mounted, the hearts of the two youths sank. If it was like this among the Claibornes, what would it be at school and in the world at large when their failure to connect intention with result became village talk? Ross bit fiercely upon an unoffending batter cake and resolved to make a call single-handed before he left the house. They went out of the dining room, their hats as ever pressed to their breasts. With no volition of their own, their uncertain young legs carried them to the porch. The Claiborne family and household followed like small boys after a circus procession. When the two turned, at bay, yet with nothing between them and liberty but a hypnotism of their own suggestion, they saw the black faces of the servants peering over the family shoulders. Ross was the boy to have drawn courage from the desperation of their case and made some decent, if not glorious, ending. But at the psychological moment, there came around the corner of the house that most contemptible figure known to the southern plantation, a shirt boy, a creature who may be described, for the benefit of those not informed, as a pickaninny clad only in a long, coarse cotton shirt. While all eyes were fastened upon him, this inglorious ambassador bolted forth his message. "Yo ma say," his eyes were fixed upon Abner. "Ef yo Don come home, she gwine come after yo, and cut yo into inch pieces wid a rawhide when she get yo." Dat just what Miss Hortense say. As though such a book as Hints and Helps had never existed, Abner shot for the gate. He was but a hobbledehoy fascinated with the idea of playing gentleman. But in Ross there were the makings of a man. For a few half-hearted paces, under the first impulse of horror, he followed his deserting chief, the laughter of the family, the unrestrainable guffaws of the Negroes sounding in the rear. But when Champ's high, offensive giggle, topping all the others, insulted his ears, he stopped dead, wheeled, and ran to the porch faster than he had fled from it. White as paper, shaking with inexpressible rage, he caught and kissed the tittering girl, violently, noisily, before them all. The Negroes fled, they dared not trust their feelings. Even Alicia sniggered unobtrusively. Grandfather Claiborne chuckled, and Aunt Missouri frankly collapsed into her rocking chair, bubbling with mirth, crying out, "Good for you, Ross. Seems you did know how to call on the girls, after all." But Ross, paying no attention, walked swiftly toward the gate. He had served his novitiate. He would never be afraid again. With cheerful alacrity, he dodged the stones flung after him with friendly, erratic aim by the girl upon whom, yesterday afternoon, he had come to make a social call. Footnotes. From Harper's Magazine, August 1906. Copyright 1906 by Harper and Brothers. Republished by the author's permission. How the Widow Won the Deacon. By William James Lambton, -1917. Of course, the widow Stimson never tried to win Deacon Hawkins, nor any other man, for that matter. A widow doesn't have to try to win a man, she wins without trying. Still, the widow Stimson sometimes wondered why the deacon was so blind as not to see how her fine farm adjoining his equally fine place on the outskirts of the town might not be brought under one management, with mutual benefit to both parties at interest. Which one that management might become was a matter of future detail. The widow knew how to run a farm successfully, and a large farm is not much more difficult to run than one of half the size. She had also had one husband, and knew something more than running a farm successfully. Of all of which the deacon was perfectly well aware, and still he had not been moved by the merging spirit of the age to propose consolidation. This interesting situation was up for discussion at the Wednesday afternoon meeting of the Sisters, Sewing Society. For my part, Sister Susan Spicer, wife of the Methodist minister, remarked as she took another tuck in a 14-year-old girl's skirt for a 10-year-old. For my part, I can't see why Deacon Hawkins and Kate Stimson don't see the error of their ways and depart from them. I rather guess she has, smiled Sister Podet, the grocer's better half, who had taken an afternoon off from the store in order to be present. Or is willing to, added Sister Maria Cartridge, a spinster still possessing faith, hope, and charity, notwithstanding she had been on the waiting list a long time. Really now, exclaimed little Sister Green, the doctor's wife, do you think it is the deacon who needs urging? It looks that way to me, Sister Podet did not hesitate to affirm. Well, I heard Sister Clark say that she had heard him call her Kitty one night when they were eating ice cream at the Mite Society. Sister Candish, the druggist's wife, added to the fund of reliable information on hand. Kitty, indeed, protested Sister Spicer. The idea of anybody calling Kate Stimson Kitty. The deacon will talk that way to most any woman, but if she let him say it to her more than once, she must be getting mighty anxious, I think. Oh, Sister Candish hastened to explain, Sister Clark didn't say she had heard him say it twice. Well, I don't think she heard him say it once, Sister Spicer asserted with confidence. I don't know about that, Sister Podet argued. From all I can see and hear, I think Kate Stimson wouldn't object to most anything the deacon would say to her, knowing as she does that he ain't going to say anything he shouldn't say. And isn't saying what he should, added Sister Green, with a sly snicker which went around the room softly. But as I was saying, Sister Spicer began, when Sister Podet, whose rocker near the window commanded a view of the front gate, interrupted with a warning, SHSH. Why shouldn't I say what I wanted to when? Sister Spicer began. There she comes now, explained Sister Podet, and as I live the deacon drove her here in his sleigh, and he's waiting while she comes in. I wonder what next. And Sister Podet, in conjunction with the entire society, gasped and held their eager breaths, awaiting the entrance of the subject of conversation. Sister Spicer went to the front door to let her in, and she was greeted with the greatest cordiality by everybody. We were just talking about you and wondering why you were so late coming, cried Sister Podet. Now take off your things and make up for lost time. There's a pair of pants over there, to be cut down, to fit that poor little Snithers boy. The excitement and curiosity of the society were almost more than could be borne, but never a sister let on that she knew the deacon was at the gate waiting. Indeed, as far as the widow could discover, there was not the slightest indication that anybody had ever heard there was such a person as the deacon in existence. Oh, she chirruped in the liveliest of humors, you will have to excuse me for today. Deacon Hawkins overtook me on the way here, and here said I had simply got to go sleigh riding with him. He's waiting out at the gate now. Is that so? Exclaimed the society unanimously, and rushed to the window to see if it were really true. Well, did you ever? Commented Sister Podet generally. Hardly ever, laughed the widow good-naturedly, and I don't want to lose the chance. You know Deacon Hawkins isn't asking somebody every day to go sleighing with him. I told him I'd go if he would bring me around here to let you know what had become of me, and so he did. Now goodbye, and I'll be sure to be present at the next meeting. I have to hurry because he'll get fidgety. The widow ran away like a lively schoolgirl. All the sisters watched her get into the sleigh with the deacon, and resumed the previous discussion with greatly increased interest. But little recked the widow, and less recked the deacon. He had bought a new horse, and he wanted the widow's opinion of it, for the widow Stimson was a competent judge of fine horseflesh. If Deacon Hawkins had one insatiable ambition, it was to own a horse which could fling its heels in the face of the best that Squire Hopkins drove. In his early manhood, the deacon was no deacon by a great deal. But as the years gathered in behind him, he put off most of the frivolities of youth, and held now only to the one of driving a fast horse. No other man in the county drove anything faster except Squire Hopkins, and him the deacon had not been able to throw the dust over. The deacon would get good ones, but somehow never could he find one that the squire didn't get a better. The squire had also in the early days beaten the deacon in the race for a certain pretty girl he dreamed about. But the girl and the squire had lived happily ever after, and the deacon, being a philosopher, might have forgotten the squire's superiority had it been manifested in this one regard only. But in horses, too, that gravelled the deacon. "How much did you give for him?" was the widow's first query, after they had reached a stretch of road that was good going, and the deacon had let him out for a length or two. "Well, what do you suppose?" "You're a judge." "More than I would give, I'll bet a cookie." "Not if you was as anxious as I am to show Hopkins that he can't drive by everything on the pike." "I thought you loved a good horse because he was a good horse," said the widow, rather disapprovingly. "I do, but I could love him a good deal harder if he would stay in front of Hopkins's best." "Does he know you've got this one?" "Yes, and he's been blowing round town that he is waiting to pick me up on the road some day and make my $500 look like a pewter quarter." "So you gave $500 for him, did you?" laughed the widow. "Is it too much?" Hesitated the widow, glancing along the graceful lines of the powerful trotter. "I suppose not if you can beat the squire." "Right you are," crowed the deacon, "and I'll show him a thing or two in getting over the ground," he added with swelling pride. "Well, I hope he won't be out looking for you today, with me in your sleigh," said the widow, almost apprehensively. "Because, you know, deacon, I have always wanted you to beat Squire Hopkins." The deacon looked at her sharply. There was a softness in her tones that appealed to him, even if she had not expressed such agreeable sentiments. Just what the deacon might have said or done after the impulse had been set going must remain unknown. For at the crucial moment, a sound of militant bells of defiance, jangled up behind them, disturbing their personal absorption, and they looked around simultaneously. Behind the bells was the squire in his sleigh drawn by his fastest stepper, and he was alone, as the deacon was not. The widow weighed 160 pounds, net, which is weighting a horse in a race rather more than the law allows. But the deacon never thought of that. Forgetting everything except his cherished ambition, he braced himself for the contest, took a twist hold on the lines, sent a sharp, quick call to his horse, and let him out for all that was in him. The squire followed suit, and the deacon. The road was wide, and the snow was worn down smooth. The track couldn't have been in better condition. The Hopkins colors were not 5 rods behind the Hawkins colors as they got away. For half a mile it was nip and tuck, the deacon encouraging his horse and the widow encouraging the deacon, and then the squire began creeping up. The deacon's horse was a good one, but he was not accustomed to hauling freight in a race. A half-mile of it was as much as he could stand, and he weakened under the strain. Not handicapped, the squire's horse forged ahead, and as his nose pushed up to the dashboard of the deacon's sleigh, that good man groaned in agonized disappointment and bitterness of spirit. The widow was mad all over that Squire Hopkins should take such a mean advantage of his rival. Why didn't he wait till another time when the deacon was alone, as he was? If she had her way, she never would speak to Squire Hopkins again, nor to his wife either. But her resentment was not helping the deacon's horse to win. Slowly the squire pulled closer to the front. The deacon's horse, realizing what it meant to his master and to him, spurted bravely. But, struggle as gamely as he might, the odds were too many for him, and he dropped to the rear. The squire shouted in triumph as he drew past the deacon, and the dejected Hawkins shriveled into a heap on the seat, with only his hands sufficiently alive to hold the lines. He had been beaten again, humiliated before a woman, and that, too, with the best horse that he could hope to put against the ever-conquering squire. Here sank his fondest hopes, here ended his ambition. From this on, he would drive a mule or an automobile. The fruit of his desire had turned to ashes in his mouth. But now, what of the widow? She realized, if the deacon did not, that she, not the squire's horse, had beaten the deaconess, and she was ready to make what atonement she could. As the squire passed ahead of the deacon, she was stirred by a noble resolve. A deep bed of drifted snow lay close, by the side of the road, not far in front. It was soft and safe, and she smiled as she looked at it as though waiting for her. Without a hint of her purpose, or a sign to disturb the deacon in his final throes, she rose as the sleigh ran near its edge, and with a spring which had many a time sent her lightly from the ground to the bare back of a horse in the meadow, she cleared the robes and lit plump in the drift. The deacon's horse knew before the deacon did that something had happened in his favor, and was quick to respond. With his first jump of relief, the deacon suddenly revived, his hopes came fast again, his blood redingled, he gathered himself, and, cracking his lines, he shot forward, and 3 minutes later he had passed the squire as though he were hitched to the fence. For a quarter of a mile, the squire made heroic efforts to recover his vanished prestige, but effort was useless, and finally concluding that he was practically left standing, he veered off from the main, rode down a farm lane to find some spot in which to hide the humiliation of his defeat. The deacon, still going at a clipping gait, had one eye over his shoulder, as wary drivers always have on such occasions, and when he saw the squire was off the track he slowed down and jogged along with the apparent intention of continuing indefinitely. Presently an idea struck him, and he looked around for the widow. She was not where he had seen her last. Where was she? In the enthusiasm of victory, he had forgotten her. He was so dejected at the moment she had leaped that he did not realize what she had done, and 2 minutes later he was so elated that, shame on him. He did not care. With her, all was lost. Without her, all was won, and the deacon's greatest ambition was to win. But now, with victory perched on his horse collar, success his at last, he thought of the widow, and he did care. He cared so much that he almost threw his horse off his feet by the abrupt turn he gave him, and back down the pike he flew as if a legion of squires were after him. He did not know what injury she might have sustained. She might have been seriously hurt, if not actually killed. And why? Simply to make it possible for him to win. The deacon shivered as he thought of it, and urged his horse to greater speed. The squire, down the lane, saw him whizzing along and accepted it profanely as an exhibition for his especial benefit. The deacon now had forgotten the squire, as he had only so shortly before forgotten the widow. 200 yards from the drift into which she had jumped there was a turn in the road, where some trees shut off the sight, and the deacon's anxiety increased momentarily until he reached this point. From here he could see ahead, and down there in the middle of the road stood the widow waving her shawl as a banner of triumph, though she could only guess at results. The deacon came on with a rush and pulled up alongside of her in a condition of nervousness he didn't think possible to him. "Hooray! Hooray!" shouted the widow, tossing her shawl into the air. "You beat him. I know you did. Didn't you? I saw you pulling ahead at the turn yonder. Where is he and his old plug? Oh, bother take him and his horse, and the race and everything. Are you hurt?" gasped the deacon, jumping out, but mindful to keep the lines in his hand. "Are you hurt?" he repeated anxiously, though she looked anything but a hurt woman. "If I am," she chirped cheerily, "I'm not hurt half as bad as I would have been if the squire had beat you, deacon. Now don't you worry about me. Let's hurry back to town so the squire won't get another chance, with no place for me to jump. And the deacon. Well, well, With the lines in the crook of his elbow, the deacon held out his arms to the widow, and the sisters at the next meeting of the sewing society were unanimously of the opinion that any woman who would risk her life like that for a husband was mighty anxious. Footnotes from Harper's Bazaar, April 1911. Copyright 1911 by Harper and Brothers, republished by permission. Gideon by Wells Hastings, 1878. In de next frog dat hound pup scene, he pass him by wide. The house, which had hung upon every word, roared with laughter, and shook with a storming volley of applause. Gideon bowed to right and to left, low, grinning, assured comedy obeisances. But as the laughter and applause grew, he shook his head and signaled quietly for the drop. He had answered many encores, and he was an instinctive artist. It was part of the fuel of his vanity that his audience had never yet had enough of him. Dramatic judgment, as well as dramatic sense of delivery, was native to him, qualities which the shrewd Felix Stuke, his manager and exultant discoverer, recognized and wisely trusted in. Off-stage Gideon was watched over like a child and a delicate investment, but once behind the footlights, he was allowed to go his own triumphant gait. It was small wonder that Stuke deemed himself one of the cleverest managers in the business, that his narrow, blue-shaven face was continually chiseled in smiles of complacent self-congratulation. He was rapidly becoming rich, and there were bright prospects of even greater triumphs, with proportionately greater reward. He had made Gideon a national character, a headliner, a star of the first magnitude in the firmament of the vaudeville theater, and all in 6 short months. Or, at any rate, he had helped to make him all this. He had booked him well and given him his opportunity. To be sure, Gideon had done the rest. Stuke was as ready as anyone to do credit to Gideon's ability. Still, after all, he, Stuke, was the discoverer, the theatrical Columbus who had had the courage and the vision. A now hallowed attack of tonsillitis had driven him to Florida, where presently Gideon had been employed to beguile his convalescence, and guide him over the intricate shallows of that long lagoon known as the Indian River in search of various fish. On days when fish had been reluctant, Gideon had been lured into conversation, and gradually into narrative and the relation of what had appeared to Gideon as humorous and entertaining. And finally Felix, the vague idea growing big within him, had one day persuaded his boatman to dance upon the boards of a long pier where they had made fast for lunch. There, with all the sudden glory of crystallization, the vague idea took definite form and became the great inspiration of Stuke's career. Gideon had grown to be to vaudeville much what Uncle Remus is to literature. There was virtue in his very simplicity. His artistry itself was native and natural. He loved a good story, and he told it from his own sense of the gleeful morsel upon his tongue as no training could have made him. He always enjoyed his story and himself in the telling. Tales never lost their savor, no matter how often repeated. Age was powerless to dim the humor of the thing, and as he had shouted and gurgled and laughed over the fun of things when all alone, or holding forth among the men and women and little children of his color, so he shouted and gurgled and broke from sonorous chuckles to musical, falsetto mirth when he fronted the sweeping tiers of faces across the intoxicating glare of the footlights. He had that rare power of transmitting something of his own enjoyments. When Gideon was on the stage, Stuke used to enjoy peeping out at the intent, smiling faces of the audience, where men and women and children, hardened theatergoers and folk fresh from the country, sat with moving lips and faces lit with an eager interest and sympathy for the black man strutting in loose-footed vivacity before them. "He's simply unique," he boasted to wondering local managers. "Unique, and it took me to find him. There he was, a little black gold mine, and all of 'em passed him by until I came. What? I guess you'll admit you have to hand it some to your Uncle Felix. If that coon's health holds out, we'll have all the money there is in the mint." That was Felix's real anxiety, if his health holds out. Gideon's health was watched over as if he had been an ailing prince. His bubbling vivacity was the foundation upon which his charm and his success were built. Stuke became a sort of vicarious neurotic, eternally searching for symptoms in his protégé. Gideon's tongue, Gideon's liver, Gideon's heart were matters to him of an unfailing and anxious interest. And of late, of course it might be imagination, Gideon had shown a little physical falling off. He ate a bit less, he had begun to move in a restless way, and worst of all, he laughed less frequently. As a matter of fact, there was ground for Stuke's apprehension. It was not all a matter of managerial imagination. Gideon was less himself. Physically, there was nothing the matter with him. He could have passed his rigid insurance scrutiny as easily as he had done months before, when his life and health had been insured for a sum that made good copy for his press agent. He was sound in every organ, but there was something lacking in general tone. Gideon felt it himself, and was certain that a misery, that embracing indisposition of his race, was creeping upon him. He had been fed well, too well. He was growing rich, too rich. He had all the praise, all the flattery that his enormous appetite for approval desired, and too much of it. White men sought him out and made much of him. White women talked to him about his career, and wherever he went, women of color, black girls, brown girls, yellow girls, wrote him of their admiration, whispered when he would listen of their passion and hero worship. City niggers bowed down before him. The high gallery was always packed with them. Musk-scented notes scrawled upon barbaric, high-toned, stationery poured in upon him. Even a few white women, to his horror and embarrassment, had written him of love, letters which he straightway destroyed. His sense of his position was strong in him, he was proud of it. There might be folks out of their hades, but he had the sense to remember. For months he had lived in a heaven of gratified vanity, but at last his appetite had begun to falter. He was sated. His soul longed to wipe a spiritual mouth on the back of a spiritual hand and have done. His face, now that the curtain was down and he was leaving the stage, was doleful, almost sullen. Stuke met him anxiously in the wings and walked with him to his dressing room. He felt suddenly very weary of Stuke. Nothing the matter, Gideon, is there? Not feeling sick or anything. No mistake, Stuke, no say. Just Don, Felix stripe hurt, that's all. But what is it, anything bothering you? Gideon sat gloomily before his mirror. Mistake, Stuke, he said at last. I been steadyin' it ove, and I about come to the delusion that I needs a good pock-shop. Seems foolish, I know, but it do seem as if a good pock-shop, fried just right, would heap considerable to dissipate this misery feelin' that's crawlin' and creepin' round my sperrit. Stuke laughed. Pork shop, eh? Is that the best you can think of? I know what you mean, though. I've thought for some time that you were getting a little overtrained. What you need is, let me see, yes, a nice bottle of wine. That's the ticket, it will ease things up and won't do you any harm. I'll go with you. Ever had any champagne, Gideon? Gideon struggled for politeness. Yes, say, I's had champagne, and it's a nice kind of liquor show enough. But Mistake Stuke say, I don want any of them high-tone drinks tonight, and F yo don mind, I'd rather amble off lone, or meb eat that pock shop with some authey-culled man, F I kin fin, one that ain, one of them no count Carolina niggers. Do you espose yo, could let me have a little money tonight, Mistake Stuke? Stuke thought rapidly. Gideon had certainly worked hard, and he was not dissipated. If he wanted to roam the town by himself, there was no harm in it. The sullenness still showed in the black face. Heaven knew what he might do if he suddenly began to balk. Stuke thought it wise to consent gracefully. Good, he said. Fly to it. How much do you want? 100. How much is coming to me? About 1,000, Gideon. Well, I'd mighty like 500 of it, if that's 'greeable to yo. Felix whistled. 500. Pork shops must be coming high. You don't want to carry all that money around, do you? Gideon did not answer. He looked very gloomy. Stuke hastened to cheer him. Of course you can have anything you want. Wait a minute, and I will get it for you. I'll bet that coon's going to buy himself a ring or something, he reflected as he went in search of the local manager and Gideon's money. But Stuke was wrong. Gideon had no intention of buying himself a ring. For the matter of that, he had several that were amply satisfactory. They had size and sparkle and luster, all the diamond brilliance that rings need to have, and for none of them had he paid much over $5. He was amply supplied with jewelry, in which he felt perfect satisfaction. His present want was positive, if nebulous. He desired a fortune in his pocket, bulky, tangible evidence of his miraculous success. Ever since Stuke had found him, life had had an unreal quality for him. His Monte Cristo wealth was too much like a fabulous, dream-found treasure, money that could not be spent without danger of awakening. And he had dropped into the habit of storing it about him, so that in any pocket into which he plunged his hand, he might find a roll of crisp evidence of reality. He liked his bills to be of all denominations, and some so large as exquisitely to stagger imagination, others charming by their number and crispness. The dignified, orange paper of a man of assured position and wealth-crackling greenbacks, the design of which tinged the whole with actuality. He was specially partial to engravings of President Lincoln, the particular savior and patron of his race. This $500 he was adding to an unreckoned sum of about $2,000, merely as extra fortification against a growing sense of gloom. He wished to brace his flagging spirits with the gay wine of possession, and he was glad, when the money came, that it was in an elastic-bound roll, so bulky that it was pleasantly uncomfortable in his pocket as he left his manager. As he turned into the brilliantly lighted street from the sombre alleyway of the stage entrance, he paused for a moment to glance at his own name, in 3-foot letters of red, before the doors of the theater. He could read, and the large block type always pleased him. This week, Gideon, that was all. None of the fulsome praise, the superlative, necessary definition given to lesser performers. He had been, he remembered, Gideon, America's foremost native comedian, a title that was at once boast and challenge. That necessity was now past, for he was a national character. Any explanatory qualification would have been an insult to the public intelligence. To the world he was just Gideon, that was enough. It gave him pleasure, as he sauntered along, to see the announcement repeated on window cards and hoardings. Presently, he came to a window, before which he paused in delighted wonder. It was not a large window. To the casual eye of the passerby, there was little to draw attention. By day it lighted the fractional floor space of a little stationer, who supplemented a slim business by a subagency for railroad and steamship lines, but tonight this window seemed the framework of a marvel of coincidence. On the broad, dusty sill inside were propped 2 cards. The one on the left was his own red-lettered announcement for the week. The one at the right, "Oh, World of Wonders," was a photogravure of that exact stretch of the inner coast of Florida which Gideon knew best, which was home. There it was, the Indian River, rippling idly in full sunlight, palmettos leaning over the water, palmettos standing as irregular sentries along the low, reef-like island which stretched away out of the picture. There was the gigantic, lonely pine he knew well, and yes, he could just make it out. There was his own ramshackle little pier, which stretched in undulating fashion, like a long-legged wading caterpillar, from the abrupt shoreline of eroded coquina into deep water. He thought at first that this picture of his home was some new and delicate device, put forth by his press agent. His name on one side of a window, his birthplace upon the other, what could be more tastefully appropriate? Therefore, as he spelled out the reading matter beneath the photogravure, he was sharply disappointed. It read, "Spend this winter in balmy Florida. Come to the land of perpetual sunshine. Golf, tennis, driving, shooting, boating, fishing, all of the best." There was more, but he had no heart for it. He was disappointed and puzzled. This picture had, after all, nothing to do with him. It was a chance, and yet what a strange chance. It troubled and upset him. His black, round-featured face took on deep wrinkles of perplexity. The misery, which had hung darkly on his horizon, for weeks engulfed him without warning. But in the very bitterness of his melancholy, he knew at last his disease. It was not champagne or recreation that he needed, not even a pork chop. Although his desire for it had been a symptom, a groping for a too homeopathic remedy, he was homesick. Easy, childish tears came into his eyes and ran over his shining cheeks. He shivered forlornly with a sudden sense of cold, and absently clutched at the lapels of his gorgeous, fur-lined ulster. Then in abrupt reaction he laughed aloud, so that the shrill musical falsetto startled the passers-by, and in another moment a little semicircle of the curious watched, spellbound as a black man, exquisitely apparelled, danced in wild, loose grace before the dull background of a somewhat grimy and apparently vacant window. A newsboy recognized him. He heard his name being passed from mouth to mouth and came partly to his senses. He stopped dancing and grinned at them. "Say, you are Gideon, ain't you?" his discoverer demanded with a sort of reverent audacity. "Yas say," said Gideon, "that's me." Yo, Shu got it right. He broke into a joyous peal of laughter, the laughter that had made him famous and bowed deeply before him. Gideon positively his lost puffamunts. Turning, he dashed for a passing trolley and, still laughing, swung aboard. He was naturally honest. In a land of easy morality, his friends had accounted him something of a paragon, nor had Stuke ever had anything but praise for him. But now he crushed aside the ethics of his intent without a single troubled thought. Running away has always been inherent in the Negro. He gave one regretful thought to the gorgeous wardrobe he was leaving behind him, but he dared not return for it. Stuke might have taken it into his head to go back to their rooms. He must content himself with the reflection that he was at that moment wearing his best. The trolley seemed too slow for him, and, as always happened nowadays, he was recognized. He heard his name whispered and was aware of the admiring glances of the curious. Even popularity had its drawbacks. He got down in front of a big hotel and chose a taxicab from the waiting rank, exhorting the driver to make his best speed to the station. Leaning back in the soft depths of the cab, he savored his independence, cheered already by the swaying, lurching speed. At the station, he tipped the driver in lordly fashion, very much pleased with himself and anxious to give pleasure. Only the sternest prudence and an unconquerable awe of uniform had kept him from tossing bills to the various traffic policemen who had seemed to smile upon his hurry. No through train left for hours, but after the first disappointment of momentary check, he decided that he was more pleased than otherwise. It would save embarrassment. He was going south, where his color would be more considered than his reputation, and on the little local he chose there was a Jim Crow car, one, that is, specially set aside for those of his race. That it proved crowded and full of smoke did not trouble him at all, nor did the admiring pleasantries which the splendor of his apparel immediately called forth. No one knew him. Indeed, he was naturally enough mistaken for a prosperous gambler, a not unflattering supposition. In the yard, after the train pulled out, he saw his private car under a glaring arc light and grinned to see it left behind. He spent the night pleasantly in a noisy game of high-low-jack, and the next morning slept more soundly than he had slept for weeks, hunched upon a wooden bench in the box-like station of a North Carolina junction. The express would have brought him to Jacksonville in 24 hours. The journey, as he took it, boarding any local that happened to be going south, and leaving it for meals or sometimes for sleep or often as the whim possessed him, filled 5 happy days. There he took a night train and dozed from Jacksonville until a little north of New Smyrna. He awoke to find it broad daylight and the car half empty. The train was on a siding, with news of a freight wreck ahead. Gideon stretched himself and looked out of the window, and emotion seized him. For all his journey the South had seemed to welcome him, but here at last was the country he knew. He went out upon the platform and threw back his head, sniffing the soft breeze, heavy with the mysterious thrill of unplowed acres, the wondrous existence of primordial jungle, where life has rioted unceasingly above unceasing decay. It was dry with the fine dust of waste places and wet with the warm mists of slumbering swamps. It seemed to Gideon to tremble with the songs of birds, the dry murmur of palm leaves, and the almost inaudible whisper of the gray moss that festooned the live oaks. He murmured, apostrophizing it. Yo's the right kind o' breeze, yo is. Yo all's healthy. Still sniffing, he climbed down to the dusty roadbed. The Negroes who had ridden with him were sprawled about him on the ground. One of them lay sleeping, face up, in the sunlight. The train had evidently been there for some time, and there were no signs of an immediate departure. He bought some oranges of a little bow-legged black boy, and sat down on a log to eat them and to give up his mind to enjoyment. The sun was hot upon him, and his thoughts were vague and drowsy. He was glad that he was alive, glad to be back once more among familiar scenes. Down the length of the train, he saw white passengers from the Pullmans restlessly pacing up and down, getting into their cars and out of them, consulting watches, attaching themselves with gesticulatory expostulation to various officials. But their impatience found no echo in his thought. What was the hurry? There was plenty of time. It was sufficient to have come to his own land. The actual walls of home could wait. The delay was pleasant, with its opportunity for drowsy sunning, its relief from the grimy monotony of travel. He glanced at the orange-colored Jim Crow with distaste, and inspiration, dawning slowly upon him, swept all other thought before it in its great and growing glory. A brakeman passed, and Gideon leaped to his feet and pursued him. "Mistay, how long yo all reckon this train goin' to be?" "About an hour." The question had been a mere matter of form. Gideon had made up his mind, and if he had been told that they started in 5 minutes, he would not have changed it. He climbed back into the car for his coat and his hat, and then almost furtively stole down the steps again and slipped quietly into the palmetto scrub. "Most made the mistake of my life," he chuckled, "stickin' to that all train fohive. 'Tisn't the right way at all fo Gideon to come home." The river was not far away. He could catch the dancing blue of it from time to time in ragged vista, and for this beacon he steered directly. His coat was heavy on his arm, his thin patent leather ties pinched and burned and demanded detours around swampy places, but he was happy. As he went along, his plan perfected itself. He would get into loose shoes again, old ones, if money could buy them, and old clothes too. The bullbriars snatching at his tailored splendor suggested that. He laughed when the Florida partridge, a small quail, whirred up from under his feet. He paused to exchange affectionate mockery with red squirrels. And once, even when he was brought up suddenly to a familiar and ominous, dry reverberation, the small, crisp sound of the rolling drums of death, he did not look about him for some instrument of destruction, as at any other time he would have done, but instead peered cautiously over the log before him and spoke in tolerant admonition. "Now, Mistay Rattlesnake, yo just min, yo own business. Nobody's goin' step on yo, ner go triflin' round yo in no way whatsomevay. Yo just lay there in the sun and gits fats yo please. Don yo tun yo weaked lil eyes on Gideon. He's just goin' long home and ain't lookin' fo no muss." He came presently to the water, and, as luck would have it, to a little group of Negro cabins, where he was able to buy old clothes, and after much dickering, a long and somewhat leaky rowboat rigged out with a tattered leg of mutton sail. This he provisioned with a jug of water, a starch box full of white cornmeal, and a wide strip of lean razorback bacon. As he pushed out from shore and set his sail to the small breeze that blew down from the north, an absolute contentment possessed him. The idle waters of the lagoon, lying without tide or current in eternal indolence, rippled and sparkled in breeze and sunlight with a merry surface activity, and seemed to lap the leaky little boat more swiftly on its way. Mosquito Inlet opened broadly before him, and skirting the end of Merritt's Island, he came at last into that longest lagoon, with which he was most familiar, the Indian River. Here the wind died down to a mere breath, which barely kept his boat in motion, but he made no attempt to row. As long as he moved at all, he was satisfied. He was living the fulfillment of his dreams in exile, lounging in the stern in the ancient clothes he had purchased, his feet stretched comfortably before him in their broken shoes, one foot upon a thwart, the other hanging overside so laxly that occasional ripples lapped the run-over heel. From time to time, he scanned shore and river for familiar points of interest, some remembered snag that showed the tip of one gnarled branch. Or he marked a newly fallen palmetto, already rotting in the water, which must be added to that map of vast detail that he carried in his head. But for the most part, his broad black face was turned up to the blue brilliance above him in unblinking contemplation. His keen eyes, brilliant despite their sun-mudded whites, reveled in the heights above him, swinging from horizon to horizon in the wake of an orderly file of little bluebill ducks, winging their way across the river, or brightening with interest at the rarer sight of a pair of mallards or redheads, lifting with the soaring circles of the great bald-headed eagle, or following the scattered squadron of heron. White heron, blue heron, young and old, trailing, sunlit, brilliant patches. Clear even against the bright white and blue of the sky above them. Often he laughed aloud, sending a great shout of mirth across the water in fresh relish of those comedies, best known and best enjoyed. It was as excruciatingly funny as it had ever been, when his boat nosed its way into a great flock of ducks idling upon the water, to see the mad paddling haste of those nearest him, the reproachful turn of their heads, or, if he came too near, their spattering run out of water, feet and wings pumping together as they rose from the surface, looking for all the world like fat little women, scurrying with clutched skirts across city streets. The pelicans, too, delighted him as they perched with pedantic solemnity upon wharf piles, or sailed in hunched and huddled gravity 20 feet above the river's surface in swift, dignified flight, which always ended suddenly in an abrupt, upended plunge that threw dignity to the winds in its greedy haste, and dropped them crashing into the water. When darkness came suddenly at last, he made in toward shore, mooring to the warm-fretted end of a fallen and forgotten landing. A straggling orange grove was here, broken lines of vanquished cultivation, struggling little trees swathed and choked in the festooning gray moss, still showing here and there the valiant golden gleam of fruit. Gideon had seen many such places, had seen settlers come and clear themselves a space in the jungle, plant their groves, and live for a while in lazy independence, and then for some reason or other they would go, and before they had scarcely turned their backs, the jungle had crept in again, patiently restoring its ancient sovereignty. The place was eerie with the ghost of dead effort, but it pleased him. He made a fire and cooked supper, eating enormously and with relish. His conscience did not trouble him at all. Stuke and his own career seemed already distant. They took small place in his thoughts and served merely as a background for his present absolute content. He picked some oranges and ate them in meditative enjoyment. For a while he nodded, half asleep, beside his fire, watching the darkened river, where the mullet, shimmering with phosphorescence, still leaped starkly above the surface and fell in spattering brilliance. Midnight found him sprawled asleep beside his fire. Once he awoke. The moon had risen, and a little breeze waved the hanging moss, and whispered in the glossy foliage of orange and palmetto with a sound like falling rain. Gideon sat up and peered about him, rolling his eyes hither and thither at the menacing leap and dance of the jet shadows. His heart was beating thickly, his muscles twitched, and the awful terrors of night pulsed and shuddered over him. Nameless specters peered at him from every shadow, ingenerate familiars of his wild, forgotten blood. He groaned aloud in a delicious terror, and presently, still twitching and shivering, fell asleep again. It was as if something magical had happened. His fear remembered the fear of centuries, and yet with the warm daylight was absolutely forgotten. He got up a little after sunrise, and went down to the river to bathe, diving deep with a joyful sense of freeing himself from the last alien dust of travel. Once ashore again, however, he began to prepare his breakfast with some haste. For the first time in his journey, he was feeling a sense of loneliness and a longing for his kind. He was still happy, but his laughter began to seem strange to him in the solitude. He tried the defiant experiment of laughing for the effect of it, an experiment which brought him to his feet in startled terror, for his laughter was echoed. As he stood peering about him, the sound came again, not laughter this time, but a suppressed giggle. It was human beyond a doubt. Gideon's face shone with relief and sympathetic amusement. He listened for a moment, and then strode surely forward toward a clump of low palms. There he paused, every sense alert. His ear caught a soft rustle, a little gasp of fear. The sound of a foot moved cautiously. "Missy," he said tentatively, "I reckon yo' alls come just 'bout end time fo' breakfast. Yo' better have some. Ef yo' ain' too white to sit down with a black man." The leaves parted, and a smiling face as black as Gideon's own regarded him in shy amusement. "Who is yo', man?" "I mought be king of Congo," he laughed, "but I ain't. Yo' see befo', yo, Jess Gideon, at yar steamed savis." He bowed elaborately in the mock humility of assured importance, watching her face in pleasant anticipation. But neither awe nor rapture dawned there. She repeated the name, inclining her head coquettishly, but it evidently meant nothing to her. She was merely trying its sound. Gideon, Gideon. I don call to min, any such name as that. Yo alls fam up not likely. He was beyond the reaches of fame. No, said Gideon, hardly knowing whether he was glad or sorry. No, I live south of he. What all's yo name? The girl giggled deliciously. Man, she said, I shu got the mose, ridiculousest name you eve did he. They call me Vashti, yo bacon's bunnin. She stepped out and ran past him to snatch his skillet deftly from the fire. Vashti, a strange and delightful name. Gideon followed her slowly. Her romantic coming and her romantic name pleased him, and too, he thought her beautiful. She was scarcely more than a girl, slim and strong and almost of his own height. She was barefooted, but her blue-checked gingham was clean and belted smartly about a small waist. He remembered only one woman who ran as lithely as she did, one of the numerous diving beauties of the vaudeville stage. She cooked their breakfast, but he served her with an elaborate gallantry, putting forward all his new and foreign graces, garnishing his speech with imposing polysyllables, casting about their picnic breakfast a radiant aura of grandeur borrowed from the recent days of his fame. And he saw that he pleased her, and with her open admiration essayed still greater flights of polished manner. He made vague plans for delaying his journey as they sat smoking in pleasant conversational ease, and when an interruption came, it vexed him. Vashti. Vashti, a woman's voice sounded thin and far away. Vashti, why? Yo chili. Vashti rose to her feet with a sigh. That's my ma, she said regretfully. What do yo care? Asked Gideon. Let her yell if wild. The girl shook her head. Ma's a mighty powerful, Oman, and she done got a club bout the size o' my wrist. She moved off a step or so and glanced back at him. Gideon leaped to his feet. When yo comin' back? Yo ain't goin' without? He held out his arms to her, but she only giggled and began to walk slowly away. With a bound he was after her, one hand catching her lightly by the shoulder. He felt suddenly that he must not lose sight of her. Let me go. Tun me loose, yo. The girl was still laughing, but evidently troubled. She wrenched herself away with an effort, only to be caught again a moment later. She screamed and struck at him as he kissed her, for now she was really in terror. The blow caught Gideon squarely in the mouth, and with such force that he staggered back, astonished, while the girl took wildly to her heels. He stood for a moment irresolute, for something was happening to him. For months he had evaded love with a gentle embarrassment. Now, with the savage crash of that blow, he knew unreasoningly that he had found his woman. He leaped after her again, running as he had not run in years, in savage, determined pursuit, tearing through briar and scrub tripping, falling, rising, never losing sight of the blue-clad figure before him until at last she tripped and fell, and he stood panting above her. He took a great breath or so, and leaned over and picked her up in his arms, where she screamed and struck and scratched at him. He laughed, for he felt no longer sensible to pain, and, still chuckling, picked his way carefully back to the shore, wading deep into the water to unmoor his boat. Then with a swift movement he dropped the girl into the bow, pushed free, and clambered actively aboard. The light, early morning breeze had freshened, and he made out well toward the middle of the river, never even glancing around at the sound of the hallooing he now heard from shore. His exertions had quickened his breathing, but he felt strong and joyful. Vashti lay a huddle of blue in the bow, crouched in fear and desolation, shaken and torn with sobbing, but he made no effort to comfort her. He was untroubled by any sense of wrong. He was simply and unreasoningly satisfied with what he had done. Despite all his gentle, easy-going, laughter-loving existence, he found nothing incongruous or unnatural in this sudden act of violence. He was aglow with happiness. He was taking home a wife. The blind tumult of capture had passed. A great tenderness possessed him. The leaky little boat was plunging and dancing in swift ecstasy of movement. All about them, the little waves ran glittering in the sunlight, plashing and slapping against the boat's low side, tossing tiny crests to the following wind, showing rifts of white here and there, blowing handfuls of foam and spray. Gideon went softly about the business of shortening his small sail, and came quietly back to his steering seat again. Soon, he would have to be making for what lee the western shore offered, but he was holding to the middle of the river as long as he could, because with every mile the shores were growing more familiar, calling to him to make what speed he could. Vashti's sobbing had grown small and ceased. He wondered if she had fallen asleep. Presently, however, he saw her face raised, a face still shining with tears. She saw that he was watching her and crouched low again. A dash of spray spattered over her, and she looked up frightened, glancing fearfully overside. Then once more her eyes came back to him, and this time she got up, still small and crouching, and made her way slowly and painfully down the length of the boat, until at last Gideon moved aside for her, and she sank in the bottom beside him, hiding her eyes in her gingham sleeve. Gideon stretched out a broad hand and touched her head lightly, and with a tiny gasp her fingers stole up to his. "Honey," said Gideon, "honey, yo ain't mad is yo." She shook her head, not looking at him. "Yo ain't grievin' fo yo ma." Again she shook her head. "Because," said Gideon, smiling down at her, "I ain't got no big club like she has." A soft and smothered giggle answered him, and this time Vashti looked up and laid her head against him with a small sigh of contentment. Gideon felt very tender, very important, at peace with himself and all the world. He rounded a jutting point and stretched out a black hand, pointing. Footnotes. From the Century Magazine, April 1914. Copyright 1914 by the Century Co., republished by the author's permission. End of volume.